See, he slammed the ledger shut so hard the oil lamp on the desk jumped. See, that was the moment Gideon Rourke decided someone in his house was going to answer for it. He just didn't know yet that the answer would cost him everything he thought he knew about himself. See, it was 10 minutes to 3 in the morning. The house was dead quiet. See, the kind of quiet that sits on a man's chest like a stone. See, and then he heard it, a sound coming from the direction of the kitchen. See, rhythmic, heavy, deliberate, thud, thud, thud. Not an intruder. See, not an animal. Something worse in a way he couldn't yet name. See, before we go any further, if stories like this one hit you somewhere deep, somewhere you didn't expect, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. See, ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. See, drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. See, I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Gideon Rourke found on the other side of that kitchen door changed 2 lives, and neither of them saw it coming. See, the Iron Hollow Ranch had been Gideon Rourke's kingdom for 31 years. See, he had built it from 40 head of cattle and a piece of land so dry and broken that the previous owner had practically given it away and thanked God to be rid of it. See, Gideon had not thanked God for anything in a very long time. See, he had thanked his own back, his own hands, his own refusal to quit when any sensible man would have. See, that stubbornness had turned 40 cattle into 4,000. See, it had turned cracked earth into grass that rolled green and thick for miles in every direction when the season was right. See, it had built a house with 12 rooms, a bunkhouse that slept 40 ranch hands, stables that held horses worth more than most men earned in a decade. See, it had also built something else, something Gideon never talked about and never looked at directly, the way you don't look directly at the sun. See, a loneliness so complete and so practiced that he had stopped recognizing it as loneliness at all. See, he just called it quiet. He called it order. He called it the way things were supposed to be when a man was serious about his work. See, he was 61 years old that autumn. His hair had gone the color of winter grass. See, his hands were scarred at the knuckles from 100 small accidents over 30 years of ranch work, because Gideon Rourke was not the kind of cattle baron who sat in an office while other men bled. See, he worked. He had always worked. It was the only language he trusted. See, the ledger he'd been reviewing that night had put him in a foul temper. See, numbers off by $14, somewhere in the Eastern pasture accounts. See, $14, a figure that would have meant nothing to him in terms of actual loss, but which meant everything in terms of principle. See, sloppiness. He could not abide sloppiness, so he'd stayed up past midnight, then past 1, then past 2, cross-checking columns by lamplight with his reading glasses pushed up on his nose, a half-empty cup of cold coffee at his elbow. See, he had finally found the error a transposed digit, the kind of stupid mistake a tired man makes, and the relief of finding it was immediately replaced by irritation at whoever had made it. See, he closed the ledger hard enough to make the lamp jump. See, and that was when he heard it, thud, 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 coming from the kitchen at the back of the house. See, Gideon sat very still for a moment. He was not a man who startled easily. See, he had been in situations during the war that had permanently recalibrated whatever instinct other men called fear. See, what he felt now was not fear, it was a sharp, cold alertness. See, someone was in his kitchen in the middle of the night, and they were working at something heavy and physical, and they did not appear to care who heard them. See, he pushed back from the desk, picked up the lamp, and walked toward the sound without hurrying. See, Gideon Rourke had never run from anything in his life that he could remember, and he wasn't going to start running toward a kitchen noise. See, the hallway between his study and the kitchen was long and dark, and his boots made no sound on the runner rug that Clara Bellamy had selected 3 years ago from a catalog. See, insisting that wood floors needed protection and that he would thank her for it. See, he had grumbled. The rug was good. He had never actually thanked her for it. See, Clara Bellamy, his housekeeper of 9 years, the woman who ran his house with a quiet, firm competence that he relied on more than he ever admitted out loud. See, she was not young somewhere in her mid-40s, though she never discussed her age, and Gideon had never asked, and she had a seriousness about her that he respected because it matched his own. See, she showed up. She did the work. She didn't dramatize or complain. See, in 9 years, the house had never been dirty, the food had never been late, and the household accounts had never been wrong by so much as a penny. See, Lenora lived with her daughter in the small cabin at the east edge of the property. See, a cabin that came with the position. Gideon knew vaguely that the daughter was a student somewhere. See, bright girl, he'd heard someone say once. He hadn't paid much attention. See, he paid attention to the work. People's personal arrangements were their own business. See, he reached the kitchen door and pushed it open. The girl standing on a wooden fruit crate in front of the big work table did not hear him come in. See, she was too deep in whatever she was doing to hear anything. See, her whole body was bent forward over an enormous mound of bread dough, far too large a mound. He noticed immediately the kind of quantity you'd prepare for 30 men, and she was driving the heel of her palm into it with everything she had. See, her dark hair had come loose from whatever she'd tied it back with and was hanging in her face. See, her dress was streaked with flour from collar to hem. See, the kitchen was warm from the oven she'd already started, and her face was sheened with sweat despite the freezing October night outside. See, she couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. See, she was standing on a crate because she wasn't tall enough to get proper leverage over the table. See, and her hands. Even from across the kitchen, in the dim light of his lamp combined with the warmer glow from the oven, Gideon could see something wrong with her hands. See, the skin across her knuckles was cracked, dark at the creases in a way that was not dirt. See, she was bleeding, had been bleeding, probably for some time, because she hadn't stopped to do anything about it. See, Gideon stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment without speaking. See, he was trying to understand what he was looking at. See, the bread dough alone would take hours, and before the dough she would have had to build the oven fire, haul water, measure and mix. See, and after the bread, there would be whatever else Lenora's morning duties required: the porridge, the coffee, the setting of the long table in the Hanses' dining room. See, he didn't know exactly what time she had started, but he knew she hadn't slept. See, he set his lamp down on the counter by the door. She spun around so fast she nearly fell off the crate. See, the sound she made was not quite a scream. It was the sound of someone who has been operating alone in the dark for so long that another human presence feels like a physical collision. See, she grabbed the edge of the work table with both hands and stared at him, chest heaving, flour dust drifting around her like snow. See, Mr. Rourke. Her voice was not what he expected. It was steady, or trying to be. See, most people, startled like that at 3 in the morning by the man who owned everything around them, would have stumbled over words. See, she didn't stumble. She just said his name, and then she straightened up on the crate, and she lifted her chin. See, that chin. He would remember that detail later, the way she lifted it. See, what in God's name are you doing in my kitchen at this hour, he said. See, it was not phrased as a question. He had a way of saying things that weren't questions, even when they technically were. See, making bread. She said it simply, without any irony at all. See, I can see that. He moved further into the kitchen, not toward her, just enough to see the full scope of what she'd set up. See, 3 large bowls. Enough flour to fill a sack. The dough she was working was one of at least 2 batches she'd already shaped, sitting to rise under clean cloths at the far end of the table. See, for 30 men, 32, with the new fellows from the Hadley hire. See, he looked at her directly for the first time since he'd come in. See, she held the look. See, she was exhausted. He could see it now in the shadows under her eyes, the slight trembling in her arms from the sustained physical effort, but she was holding herself together through something that was more than just stubbornness. See, it was the specific controlled composure of someone who cannot afford to fall apart. "You're Clara," he said, "Lenora's girl." "Yes, sir." "See, where is your mother?" Something shifted in her face. See, just for a second. A small tightening around the eyes, quickly smoothed back. "See, she has a fever." She asked me to cover for her tonight so she wouldn't miss her duties. See, she'll be fine by morning. Gideon looked at her hands. See, she noticed him looking. She moved them slightly, angling them so the worst of the cracking was not as visible. See, a small automatic gesture of concealment, the gesture of someone who has practiced hiding the evidence of effort. See, how long have you been at this? He said. Not long. See, he looked at the 2 completed batches resting under the cloths, then at the current batch she'd been working. See, not long was not true, and they both knew it. She had been at this for hours. See, how long? He said again. She met his eyes. Since 11. See, 4 hours. 4 hours of physical labor in the middle of the night by a girl who should have been asleep, and before him on the work table was the evidence of exactly how hard she'd been working because she hadn't had time to slow down. See, you're bleeding. He said it the same way he'd say a fence post is loose. See, a fact, without drama. She glanced down at her hands with the expression of someone who already knew and had decided not to think about it. See, it's fine. It is not fine. He walked to the cabinet along the wall where he knew vaguely, see, that Lenora kept the household medical supplies, the same cabinet he'd been directed to exactly once in 9 years by Lenora herself when a ranch hand had cut himself in the house rather than properly in the, see, bunkhouse where such things were supposed to happen. See, he found the tin of salve and a roll of clean cloth and brought them to the work table. See, Clara watched him do this with an expression he couldn't quite read. See, something between wariness and something else. Not gratitude, yet too early for gratitude. See, more like the look of an animal that has learned to be uncertain about offered kindness. See, give me your hands, he said. Mr. Rourke, I really need to finish. See, the bread will wait 3 minutes. Give me your hands. See, she gave him her hands. He cleaned the cracked skin as efficiently as he could manage, applied the salve, wrapped the worst of the cracking in the cloth strips. See, he did not do it gently the way a mother would, or roughly the way a man who didn't care would. See, he did it the way he did most things with focused, practical attention, as if her hands were a problem to be solved, and he intended to solve them correctly. See, he had wrapped worse. He had wrapped his own hands like this after fence work in the early years, when there wasn't anyone else to do it. See, when he let go of her hands, she looked at them for a moment and then looked up at him, and the wariness had shifted. See, not gone, but shifted. Thank you, she said. He stepped back. See, picked up his lamp from the counter, turned slightly as if he was going back to his study, and then stopped. See, something near the work table had caught the light from his lamp. See, a leather satchel worn at the corners, sitting on the stool near the kitchen door. See, the kind a student carries, and from the top of it, where it wasn't quite fully closed, the edge of a paper with official-looking print along the top, and a seal he recognized because he had seen similar ones before. See, a territorial education seal. He walked back to the satchel before she could move to intercept him. See, not snooping, he wasn't the kind of man who went through other people's things, but the seal had his attention the way a wrong number in a ledger had his attention. See, something that needed accounting for. He pulled the paper out just far enough to see the header. See, Montana Territory Education Board Office of Teacher Preparation Certificate of Scholarship Award. See, he looked up at Clara. She had gone very still. You received a scholarship, he said. See, she didn't answer. A scholarship to the Territorial Teachers Academy. He looked at the date on the paper. See, the scholarship had been awarded 2 months ago. 2 months. See, and she was here in his kitchen at 3 a.m. making bread for 32 men with bleeding hands. See, this is the highest entrance score in the territory. See, the highest in the territory that year, she said. See, very quiet, very flat. That's the same thing. She said nothing. See, Gideon set the paper down on the work table beside the bread dough. See, he looked at her for a long moment in the lamplight and the oven glow, and the picture in front of him was so wrong, so jarringly, almost violently wrong, that he felt something move in his chest that he hadn't felt move in years. See, not sympathy exactly. He wasn't a sentimental man. See, Something more like the feeling he'd had 30 years ago watching a young horse run full speed into a fence it hadn't seen coming. See, the waste of it, the wrongness of the waste. Why are you here, he said. See, and I mean why? Not what you're going to tell me about your mother's fever. See, the chin came up again, and then she told him. Not all of it, he would not find out all of it until later, but enough. See, her mother wasn't just sick with a temporary fever. See, she hadn't been well for months. Clara had been covering shifts for weeks, nights, mostly slipping back to the cabin before dawn, so no one at the ranch would notice Lenora wasn't doing the work herself. See, she'd been managing. She was good at managing. She said this without pride, just as fact. See, and the scholarship, he said. She looked at the paper on the work table. See, she looked at it the way you look at something you've already decided to walk away from, and you're trying to make yourself stop looking at it so the walking away becomes easier. See, scholarships have deadlines, she said. And that was all she said. See, Gideon stood in the kitchen for a long moment after that. See, the oven crackled. Outside, the October wind came off the northern plain and pushed against the walls of the house with a low, steady sound. See, he picked up his lamp. Finish the bread, he said. See, and then go to bed. I'll speak with you in the morning. See, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. In the hallway, he stopped walking. See, he stood in the dark for a while, and he thought about a girl standing on a wooden crate in the middle of the night with bleeding hands and a scholarship letter in her satchel that she had stopped allowing herself to look at. See, and Gideon Rourke, who had not lost sleep over another person's situation in longer than he could honestly recall, did not go back to his study. See, he went back to bed and lay there until morning with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what he should have asked. See, what he should have noticed, what had been happening inside the walls of his own house that he had simply because it was easier, because he was busy, because it was not his concern, chosen not to see. See, the $14 ledger error seemed very small now. See, very small indeed. He told himself he was going to the east pasture to check on the fence line. See, that was what he told Dale Pruitt, his foreman, when he rode out the next morning without explanation. See, Dale had learned over 11 years not to ask follow-up questions when Gideon used that particular tone, the flat, matter-of-fact tone that meant the conversation was already finished before it had properly begun. See, so Dale nodded and went back to organizing the morning work assignments, and Gideon rode east. See, he did not go to the fence line. He rode to the neighboring property first. See, a smaller outfit called the Hatcher Place, owned by a man named Cord Hatcher, who ran a few hundred head of cattle on land that bordered Iron Hollow's eastern edge. See, Hatcher was not a bad man, not exactly, but he was the kind of man who cut corners where he thought nobody was watching and paid the lowest wages the market would bear, and considered this simply good business practice. See, Gideon had dealt with him over boundary disputes twice in the past decade, and had found him slippery both times, not dishonest enough to confront directly, but not straight enough to trust. See, he found Hatcher in his barn and got to the point without pleasantries. See, you've been hiring day labor to work fence repair on your east boundary. See, Hatcher looked up from the harness he was oiling. He was a lean man in his 50s, with a sun-damaged face and the careful eyes of someone who was always quietly calculating whether a conversation was going to cost him something. See, time to time, nothing wrong with that. One of your day laborers. See, young woman. Dark hair. Who is she? A flicker of something in Hatcher's eyes. See, not guilt. Exactly, men like Hatcher didn't do guilt in the conventional sense, but a recognition that the ground had just shifted and he needed to be careful. See, girl comes by looking for work a few times a week. See, does fence repair and some hauling. Good worker, actually. See, doesn't complain. How much are you paying her? Hatcher named a figure. See, Gideon looked at him for a long moment without expression. See, the figure Hatcher named was roughly half of what he would have paid a grown man for the same work. See, maybe a little less than half. She's 17 years old, Gideon said. See, his voice was very level. She didn't tell me her age. See, you didn't ask. It wasn't a question. And you didn't ask because you didn't want to know, because knowing would have meant paying her properly. He let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. See, she won't be working your fence line anymore. Hatcher's careful eyes went a little careful. See, now hold on, Rourke. See, if she's not my anything, see, Gideon said. See, she's a girl who needed money, and you were willing to take the labor at a price nobody grown would have accepted. See, that's the whole of it. We're done here. He rode away from the Hatcher place, feeling a specific kind of anger that was less like heat and more like cold, the settled, deliberate kind that doesn't burn itself out quickly. See, the kind that makes decisions. He turned his horse toward the doctor's office in town next. See, Dr. Emmett Harlow had been practicing medicine in the area for 20 years and had attended to Iron Hollow's workers on a dozen occasions, broken bones mostly. See, a bad infection once that had nearly taken a man's hand, the ordinary injuries of hard physical work. See, he was a small man with a large gray mustache and the unflappable manner of someone who had seen most of what human bodies can do to themselves and had made peace with all of it. See, Gideon sat across from him in the small office that smelled of carbolic and pipe tobacco and asked him directly about lung illnesses in women of middle age, what the symptoms looked like in the early stages, see, what a person might do to hide them and for how long, and what happened if they weren't treated. See, Harlow looked at him over the mustache. You have someone specific in mind. See, I'm asking generally. Harlow folded his hands on the desk. See, generally then. Early stages fatigue, a cough that comes and goes, night sweats. See, easy enough to dismiss as ordinary tiredness, especially in a person who works hard and doesn't want to believe something's wrong. See, a determined person could hide it for 6 months, possibly longer if they're careful and the people around them aren't paying close attention. A pause. See, the problem with hiding it is that what's manageable at 6 months becomes considerably less manageable at 12. See, the lungs don't wait for people to be ready. What does treatment look like? See, rest, warmth, proper food, not working-class rations, actual nutrition. See, there are some medications that help with the inflammation. See, I won't pretend it's a simple fix, but I've seen people recover fully when the conditions are right. Another pause, more weighted than the first. See, and I've seen people not recover when the conditions weren't. See, Gideon stood up. I'll likely be sending someone to you in the next day or two. See, make sure you're available. He rode back to Iron Hollow. See, he did not go to the main house immediately. See, he went first to the foreman's office, where Dale Pruitt was going over the afternoon rosters, and told him that he would need the small guest room in the main house prepared, the one on the ground floor, nearest the kitchen. See, with the south-facing window that caught the afternoon sun. See, Dale looked up from the roster with an expression of careful neutrality and said he'd see to it. See, then Gideon told him something else, and Dale's careful neutrality shifted just slightly into something that looked almost like surprise, though he controlled it quickly. See, you're sure, Dale said. I just said it, didn't I? See, yes, sir. Gideon went to find Clara. He found her not at the main house, but at the east fence line of Iron Hollow's own property, which was not where he had expected to find her at all. See, she was attempting to reset a fence post that had heaved out of the frozen ground, a task that required driving it back down with a heavy mallet while holding it plumb, which was genuinely a 2-person job. See, she was doing it alone. She had rigged a length of cord from the post to a fixed rail to keep it from listing while she swung the mallet, a solution that was not elegant but was working after a fashion. See, she was covered in mud from where she'd been kneeling to clear the frost-heaved soil around the base of the post. See, her coat too light for the temperature, he noticed, the kind of coat you wear when you can't afford a heavier one, was open at the front because swinging a mallet generates its own warmth. See, she heard him coming and turned, and for a second he saw something cross her face before she had time to school it. See, not fear, not quite. Something closer to the particular exhaustion of someone who has been keeping a very heavy secret and who has been dreading, on some level, the moment it stops being a secret. See, she turned back to the post and swung the mallet again. See, I told you I'd speak with you in the morning, he said. See, He dismounted and stood at the fence, watching her. See, it's past noon. I had work to finish. Swing. The post drove down another inch. See, the bread came out well, if that's what you're checking on. See, it's not. Swing. Clara. He said her name the way he'd said it in the kitchen the night before, not harsh, but with a weight to it that indicated the word meant business. See, stop for a minute. She stopped. See, she held the mallet at her side and looked at him, and her face was doing the same thing it had done in the kitchen, that carefully assembled composure that he now recognized as something she'd built for exactly these situations. See, for moments when someone was about to see something she didn't want seen. See, I went to see Cord Hatcher this morning, he said. See, something shifted in her expression, quick, and then gone. See, he had no right to tell you. He didn't tell me much. See, he didn't have to. Gideon pulled his coat off, the heavy one, lined with wool, the one he wore for days like this, and held it toward her. See, put this on. She stared at the coat. I'm not cold. See, you're shaking. That's from the mallet work. He kept holding it out. See, she stared at it for another moment with an expression that was hard to read, frustration maybe, or something that was trying to look like frustration but had a different shape underneath, and then she took it and put it on. See, it was enormous on her, the shoulders hanging halfway down her upper arms, the hem nearly at her knees. See your mother, he said. How long has she been sick? See, honestly, a long pause. The wind came off the northern plain and moved through the dried grass along the fence line with a sound like whispering. See, since spring, Clara said. 6 months then. See, maybe more. He thought about what Harlow had said about 6 months versus 12. See, he kept his face even. How bad? She has good days. She said it carefully. See, she's been having more bad ones lately. The cold makes it worse. See, she stopped, pressed her lips together. She doesn't know I've been doing her night duties at the ranch. See, she thinks I arranged with someone at the school to continue my studies from home. See, she thinks I'm still enrolled. He looked at her. You've been lying to your mother. See, I've been protecting my mother. Quick, sharp. The first real heat he'd heard from her. See, there's a difference, is there? Yes, she held his gaze. See, if she knew I'd given up school, she'd drag herself out of bed and come back to work before she was ready, and it would she stopped again. See, this time what crossed her face was not frustration. See, it was something rawer and harder to look at. She'd make herself worse. See, she won't stop moving unless she thinks everything is taken care of. See, so I've been making sure everything is taken care of. See, Gideon was quiet for a moment. The cold moved around both of them. See, in his heavy coat, Clara had stopped shaking, though he doubted she would admit it. See, the scholarship, he said. She looked away, down at the muddy ground near the base of the fence post. See, the deadline for the acceptance is the end of this week. See, I know when the deadline is. I asked Dale to find out this morning. See, she looked up at that. See, the wariness back, and something else. Something that looked almost like the beginning of something she was fighting to keep from being hope. Because hope was a thing that had cost her before, and she wasn't sure she could afford it again. See, why would you do that? Because I needed to know. He looked at her steadily. See, you received the highest entrance score in the territory. See, you have a scholarship covering your full tuition. See, and you're standing in a frozen field driving fence posts because you have no other way to buy your mother's medicine. See, she said nothing. That is the situation, he said. See, that's all of it. That's enough of it, she said quietly. See, he picked up the mallet from where she'd set it against the rail. See, he looked at the post, sighted along it, and drove it down 3 hard blows in quick succession, the right depth, plumb, solid. See, then he set the mallet against the fence and looked at her. See, I need you to come with me, he said. The wariness sharpened. See, where? To the main house. To your mother's cabin first, and then the main house. See, my mother doesn't need. Clara! His voice was not unkind, but it didn't leave room. See, I have been running this ranch for 31 years. See, in that time I have made approximately 4,000 decisions, some of them good, and some of them I'd do differently if I had the chance. See, but I have never not once made a decision about something on my property and then been talked out of it while standing in a field. He looked at her. See, come with me. She looked at him for a long moment. See, the coat was absurd on her. She looked like a child wearing her father's clothes. See, and yet she had the same quality that she'd had on the crate in the kitchen, that particular stillness of someone deciding whether to trust, not from a position of weakness, but from a position of genuine choice. See, she came with him. The walk from the east fence line to Clara Bellamy's cabin took 12 minutes. See, Gideon let Clara set the pace, which was faster than he'd expected. She had a purposeful stride, even exhausted, and she didn't say anything during the walk, and neither did he. See, there wasn't much to say yet. The saying would come once he'd seen what he needed to see. See, he'd told himself he had a fair idea of what he'd find. See, he was wrong. The cabin was small, which he knew. He'd passed it 100 times and never gone inside. See, what he was not prepared for was the cold. The moment Clara pushed open the door, the air from inside was barely warmer than the air outside. See, there was a wood stove in the corner, small, with an inadequate fire in it, not because someone had been negligent, he realized quickly, but because the woodpile beside the stove was almost gone. See, there were 3 or 4 pieces of split wood left. See, maybe 4. On a day like this, that was perhaps 3 hours of heat. See, Clara Bellamy was in the bed. He had seen Clara Bellamy nearly every day for 9 years. See, she had always been not robust exactly. She was a slender woman, but upright. See, present. The word he would have used was capable, in the way that covers everything from physical ability to a fundamental orientation toward competence. See, the woman in the bed looked like someone who'd been using up her capable for a long time and had run out. See, her color was wrong. Her breathing, even asleep, had an audible quality that did not belong in a sleeping person's breath. See, the room had the particular smell of illness that Gideon recognized from the war, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but there, underneath everything else. See, he stood in the doorway. Behind him, Clara had stopped walking. See, she stood at his shoulder, and he was aware of her presence the way he would have been aware of the tension in a rope, pulled close to its breaking point. See, she was watching him look at her mother, and she was waiting for his reaction, and whatever he showed in the next few seconds was going to matter. See, he showed nothing. He turned to Clara and said quietly, "When did she last have the medicine?" See, this morning. I had enough for 4 more days. A pause. See, I was going to go to Hatcher's again tomorrow to get the money for the next week's supply. See, he looked at the woodpile, and the wood. I was going to split more tonight. She said it without inflection. See, the way you say things when you've stripped the feeling out of them, because feeling them has become an unaffordable luxury. See, right. He looked at the room once more, the thin blanket on the bed, the bowl on the side table with the cloth draped over the edge that meant she'd been using it to cool a fever. See, the water that needed to be changed because it had been sitting long enough to go lukewarm, and he felt the cold anger from the morning come back, but different now. See, directed inward, at himself, at 31 years of a particular kind of blindness that he had dressed up as not interfering in other people's business, and now recognized, standing in this room, as something considerably less dignified. See, he had known this woman for 9 years. He turned to Clara. See, pack what your mother needs for several days, whatever you'd want her to have close by. See, I'm moving her to the main house. Clara blinked. I beg your pardon. See, the ground floor guest room, south window. It's warmer than this cabin is in the middle of summer, let alone November. See, I'm sending Dale's boy for Harlow before noon, mister. See, Rourke. Clara's voice had gone careful in a different way now, not the controlled composure from before, but the careful tone of someone who isn't sure whether to be grateful or insulted and is trying to work out which it is before responding. See, you don't have to. I'm not doing it because I have to. See, I'm doing it because it needs to be done, and I have the means to do it. He met her eyes. See, there's a difference. He watched her absorb that. See, he watched her recognize her own words coming back to her from a different direction, and he saw the moment she decided what to do with them. See, Not quite a smile, she was too careful for that, too practiced in keeping her reactions close to the chest, but a softening. See, almost imperceptible, like the very first thing that happens to ice when the temperature turns. See, she's going to ask questions, Clarissa said. Tell her the truth. See, or most of it. She's going to refuse. I expect she'll try. He picked up the water bowl from the side table and walked to the cabin door. See, go wake her up. Tell her to get ready to move. I'll send 2 of the hands with a cart for her things, and she can argue with them about it if she wants. See, he stepped outside with the water bowl and stood in the cold for a moment and let out a long breath that turned to steam in the November air. See, he went to find his foreman. The rest of that afternoon moved in pieces, the way things move when you've set something in motion that has its own momentum, and your job is mostly to not stand in the way of it. See, Dale sent a man for Harlow. 2 of the younger hands, good, steady fellows, the kind who took instructions without editorializing, drove a cart to the cabin and moved Clara Bellamy. See, protesting the whole journey in a voice too weak to carry much conviction, to the ground floor guest room. See, a 3rd man was sent to town for firewood and supplies. See, Gideon stayed out of the way of most of it. See, he stood in the hallway outside the guest room while Harlow examined Lenora, and he listened to the sounds on the other side of the door, Lenora's voice, too quiet to make out the words, and Harlow's responses, and Clara's voice once. See, saying something sharp that was followed by a silence that meant something had landed hard. See, after 40 minutes, Harlow came out and pulled the door, mostly closed behind him. See, how bad, Gideon said. Harlow looked at him with the kind of look that is not quite a reprimand, but is adjacent to one. See, you want me to say it plainly? I always want things said plainly. See, another month in that cabin through a Montana winter, and you'd have been finding her replacement in the spring. He let that sit. See, she's not past helping. She's a strong woman underneath all of this, and the illness hasn't taken as much as it could have. See, but she needs warmth and rest and proper food and consistent medication, and she needs them now, not after Christmas. See, she'll have all of it. Harlow nodded slowly. I'll come back in 3 days. See, send for me sooner if the breathing changes. He glanced back at the door. See, the daughter, she's been managing this alone? Yes. See, Harlow shook his head once. Not condemnation, just the shake of a man who has seen too many versions of this particular story, and has not made his peace with any of them. See, he picked up his bag and walked toward the front door, and then stopped. See, the girl's hands, he said, without turning around. See, I noticed when she shook mine. You've got her doing physical labor. See, she was already doing physical labor for Cord Hatcher. See, a pause. Hatcher. He said the name the way you say a word that tastes bad. See, of course she was. Another pause, longer. Gideon. See, the scholarship, I know. The deadline. I know when the deadline is. See, Harlow looked at him over his shoulder. Something in his expression that was not quite a question because it didn't need to be. See, then he nodded, put on his hat, and left. Gideon stood in the hallway alone for a moment. See, through the closed door of the guest room he could hear, very faintly, Clara Bellamy saying something in a low voice, and Clara answering. See, he couldn't make out the words. He didn't try. He walked to his study and sat down at his desk and did not open the ledger. See, he thought about the scholarship letter. He thought about the deadline at the end of the week. See, he thought about the Territorial Education Board and how they worked, because he had dealt with them once before over the matter of funding a school building on one of the smaller ranch properties to the north, a negotiation that had been, by turns, see, frustrating and absurd, because bureaucracies are generally both of those things simultaneously. See, he thought about whether there was time, and whether there was a way, and what it would cost him if he tried and failed, versus what it would cost everyone involved if he didn't try at all. See, then he thought about something Harlow had said. She's a strong woman underneath all of this. See, he thought about Clara in the field, rigging a cord from a fence post to hold it plumb so she could drive it alone. See, he thought about Clara in the kitchen at 3 a.m. on a wooden crate with bleeding hands and a scholarship letter in her satchel. See, he thought about the way she'd lifted her chin when he'd startled her, and the way she'd recognized her own words when he'd thrown them back at her. See, and the way she'd looked at her mother's door from the hallway with an expression that was too controlled to be called relief, but was the closest thing to it. See, he thought about the cost of not trying. He picked up his pen and wrote 2 letters. See, the first to the Territorial Education Board in the capital. See, explaining that he was writing on behalf of a scholarship recipient named Clara Bellamy, who was experiencing a family medical emergency that had prevented her from submitting her acceptance documentation on time, see, and requesting a brief extension of the deadline. See, he wrote it in the voice he used for business correspondence, clear, direct, no sentimentality, the kind of voice that communicated that the person writing expected to be taken seriously and would notice if they weren't. See, he signed it with his full name and the Iron Hollow Ranch heading and folded it into an envelope. See, the second letter he wrote to a man named Amos Whitfield, see, who sat on the Territorial Education Board and who owed Gideon Rourke a favor from a land dispute 3 years ago in which Gideon had testified on Whitfield's behalf and not been required to, and had done it anyway because it was the right call. See, the second letter was considerably shorter than the first and considerably more direct. See, he sealed both envelopes. Then he went to the kitchen. See, because it was approaching dinner, and because the cook, a man named Hugh, who was excellent with beef, and less excellent with anything that required delicacy, was going to need instruction about what to prepare for someone recovering from a lung. See, illness, which was not Hugh's area of natural expertise. See, he found Clara in the kitchen already. See, standing at the work table. See, not working. See, just standing. See, her hands were flat on the surface of the table, and her head was slightly bowed, and she was breathing in the slow, deliberate way of someone who has given themselves permission to stop moving for 30 seconds and is using every one of them. See, he stopped in the doorway and didn't say anything. See, after a moment, she became aware of him and straightened up. See, the composure came back into place, not quite fast enough to hide that it had slipped. See, she's asleep, Clara said. The medicine Harlow left is helping already, I think. See, or maybe she's just exhausted enough that she'd sleep anywhere. She paused. See, she cried when she found out I'd left school. She doesn't cry easily. Another pause, and her voice went careful again. See, she wanted to get up and speak to you herself, I know. See, I heard her trying. Something in Clara's face, not quite a smile, but its ghost. See, she's stubborn. Apparently it runs in the family. See, she looked at him. Not the wariness, now something different. Still guarded, but also assessing. The way you look at something you're trying to understand the full shape of. See, why are you doing this? I told you already. You told me it needed doing and you had the means. See, that's not a reason, that's a statement of logistics. See, he considered that for a moment. It was a fair observation. See, she was, he noted, quite precise with language for someone who had spent the last several months doing mostly physical labor. See, because it was happening on my property, he said, and I didn't know about it, and that bothers me. See, that's still logistics. Clara. She waited. I've been running this ranch for 31 years, he said. See, I know every fence post, every water source, every foot of this land. See, I know the yield of every pasture and the temperament of every horse in the stables, and which of my hands are reliable in a crisis, and which aren't. He looked at her. See, I did not know that the woman who has run my house for 9 years was dying in a cold cabin a quarter mile from where I sleep. He said it flatly, not dramatizing it, just naming it. See, that is not a small failure. She was quiet for a moment. See, she hid it well. She shouldn't have had to. Clara absorbed that. See, she looked down at her hands on the table, the wrapped ones, still bearing the cloth and salve from the night before. See, you wrote letters today. I saw you from the hallway. See, yes, to the education board. Among others, the deadline is Friday. See, today is Wednesday. I'm aware of that. She looked up at him. See, her face was doing a complicated thing, too many things at once, some of which were fighting each other. See, if they say no, they might say no, he said. It seemed important to be honest about that. See, I'm not going to tell you it's certain. But I sent 2 letters. and one of them is to a man who owes me something. And I intend to ride to town in the morning and send them with my fastest courier and have the courier wait for a response. See, that's what I can do. She looked at him for a long time. See, the light in the kitchen was the late afternoon light, soft and golden in a way that the Montana autumn does. Sometimes when it isn't being brutal, it's briefly beautiful, and it made the kitchen look warmer than it was. See, you should eat something, she said finally. I'll help Hugh with dinner. See, it was the most indirect thing she had said to him since he'd met her, and also somehow the most direct. See, he recognized it for what it was, not a deflection, but an acceptance. See, the only kind she seemed capable of, the kind expressed through doing rather than saying. See, all right, he said. He moved to the far end of the kitchen to stay out of Hugh's way and watched Clara tie on an apron with her bandaged hands and begin reorganizing Hugh's preparations with the quiet, practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this work for months without recognition and was going to keep doing it with or without recognition because it needed doing. See, she was 17 years old. See, he sat down on the stool near the kitchen door, the same stool where her satchel had been sitting the night before, where the scholarship letter had been visible at the top, and he watched her work, and he thought about Friday. See, and about the letters, and about what he was going to say to Wesley Pike in the morning, when he told him to saddle the fastest horse in the stable. See, and somewhere underneath all of that, in a place he did not examine directly, he thought about the photograph he had not yet seen. See, the one she carried everywhere, the one that would, within 24 hours, change the entire shape of the story he thought he was in. See, but he didn't know that yet. He just sat in the kitchen while the light went out of the afternoon and watched Clara Bellamy make dinner with wrapped hands. See, and felt the particular heaviness of a man who has realized he has been looking at his own life wrong for a very long time and does not yet know how to look at it differently. See, dinner, that first evening, was not a comfortable affair. See, Hugh had made beef stew, which was what Hugh made when he was uncertain about anything, because beef stew was reliable and required no decisions more complicated than how much salt. See, it was good stew. Nobody said much about it. See, Gideon sat at the head of the long table in the dining room, a room built for the kind of entertaining he had never actually done, and Clara sat 3 seats down on the left, which was where he had indicated she should sit. See, and the space between them was filled with the particular silence of 2 people who have said a great deal to each other in a short period of time and have not yet worked out what comes next. See, Clara ate steadily and without comment. She was hungry, genuinely hungry, the kind that doesn't bother with manners about pace, and she did not try to hide it, which he found he respected. See, she had eaten half her bowl before he had properly started his, and she caught him noticing and met his eyes with a look that said she was not going to apologize for it, and he should not expect her to. See, he didn't. He turned back to his own bowl. Halfway through the meal, Clara pushed her chair back and said she was going to check on her mother. See, sit down, Gideon said, not looking up from his stew. See, Hugh's girl is sitting with her. If anything changes, she'll come for you. See, Clara sat back down. She picked up her spoon and then set it down. See, she's going to wake up confused. Probably. She doesn't know this room. See, she won't know where she is. Clara. He looked up. See, Hugh's girl has been sitting with sick people since she was 12. See, she's 23 now. She knows what to do. He looked back at his bowl. See, eat your dinner. A pause. Then the sound of the spoon being picked up again. See, they finished the meal in silence, and when Hugh brought out the coffee, Clara wrapped both hands around her cup in the automatic way of someone who has been cold for so long that warmth is something you hold on to when you find it. See, and she looked at the surface of the coffee and did not drink it immediately, just held it. See, it was then that Gideon noticed the photograph. It was small, the size of a calling card, the old-fashioned kind, and it was sitting on the table beside her bowl, which was where it apparently lived when she sat down anywhere. See, the same way some people always set their hat or their gloves within reach. See, he had not seen her place it there. It had simply appeared, the way objects do when they belong to someone who handles them constantly and without thinking. See, the photograph was a tintype, old. The edges had gone soft with handling, the way paper edges do when they've been picked up by the same hands hundreds of times. See, the image showed a man in uniform military, the style of it 30 years old at least, standing with a particular kind of stillness that belonged to formal portraits of that era. See, when the exposure required holding still long enough that you had time to think about what your face was doing. See, Gideon looked at the photograph. He looked at it the way he had looked at the transposed digit in the ledger 2 nights ago, with the sharp, narrowing attention of someone who has recognized that something is wrong with what they're seeing. See, and wrong in a specific way, a way that means something. See, he set down his coffee cup. "Where did you get that photograph?" he said. See, Clara looked up from her cup, then down at the tintype, then back at him. See, her expression was the mild, practiced one of someone who has been asked about a personal possession and is deciding how much to share. See, "It's my grandfather, my mother's father. She gave it to me when I was small," a pause. "See, he died before I was born. What was his name?" Something in his voice made her focus. See, he could feel her refocus the same quality of attention she'd used in the kitchen when he'd told her the secret was over a sharpening, a wariness that was also, he'd come to understand, her version of taking something seriously. "See, Nathaniel," she said. "Nathaniel Bellamy." The word that came up his throat was not a word. See, it was more like the sound a man makes when something hits him somewhere he wasn't bracing for. See, he caught it before it became audible, just barely. See, "May I see it?" he said. She hesitated for exactly 1 second, the hesitation of someone whose instinct is to protect the things that matter, and then she slid the tintype across the table to him. See, he picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. The man in the photograph was perhaps 30 years old. See, he was lean, with a quality of wiry, economical strength that came through even in the stillness of a formal portrait. See, his jaw was strong, and his eyes, even rendered in the flat silver-gray tones of a tintype, had a directness to them that Gideon recognized. See, not because he had seen this man's photograph before. See, he had not, but because he had spent a very long time in the years after the war trying to reconstruct this face from memory and had never gotten it quite right. See, the memory and the photograph did not match perfectly. See, memory never matches perfectly, but the jaw was right. See, the set of the shoulders, the particular way the man's chin was lifted, not arrogant, just present, committed to the moment in a way that had nothing to prove. See, Gideon set the photograph down on the table. He was 61 years old. See, he had built an empire out of cracked earth and stubbornness. See, he had buried a wife 20 years ago and had not let himself be broken by it. See, he had made hard decisions in hard circumstances for 3 decades and had rarely second-guessed any of them. See, he was not a man who lost his composure at the dinner table. See, he was losing his composure at the dinner table. Not dramatically, not tears, nothing like that. He would not have known how to do that, even if he'd wanted to. See, but his hands, flat on the table now on either side of the photograph, were not entirely steady, and the breath he took was the careful kind, the kind you take when you need to get a hold of something before it gets away from you. See, Clara was watching him. "Mr. Rourke," she said. Not a question. See, just his name, but careful with it. "Tell me about him," Gideon said. See, his voice was steady, just barely. "What your mother told you about him." See, Clara looked at him for a moment longer with that focused, assessing quality. See, something was happening across the table from her, and she could feel the shape of it without knowing yet what it was. See, she didn't talk about him often. She paused, choosing the word carefully, a painful subject. See, he died in the war. He was a soldier. She said he was a good man who went toward hard things instead of away from them, and that she tried to raise me the same way. Another pause, quieter. See, she said there was a man he helped once, during the war. See, pulled him out of a bad situation. She never knew the man's name. See, grandfather never found out what happened to him after they were separated. See, It bothered him until he died. Gideon looked at the photograph. See, he thought about a field in Virginia in the summer of 1863. See, he thought about the way the smoke had sat so thick in the air that visibility dropped to 20 feet in any direction. See, he thought about a musket ball that had caught him at the hip and dropped him into the mud while everything around him was noise and chaos and the particular smell of a battlefield. See, which was nothing like anything else on Earth and which he had never been able to describe adequately to anyone who hadn't been there. See, he thought about lying in that mud, certain in the absolute, uncomplicated way you can be certain of things when you're 23 and bleeding out, that this was where he was going to die. See, and then two hands had grabbed him under the arms. See, he had not seen the man's face clearly. At first the smoke was too thick, the pain was too loud, but he had felt the grip, and the grip was extraordinary. See, not just strong, determined. The grip of someone who had decided something and was not going to be talked out of it. See, someone who had come back for him when common sense said to keep moving and leave the fallen where they were. See, he had been dragged 30-40 yards, he was never sure of the distance, and deposited behind a stone wall where the firing was less concentrated. See, the man had taken one look at the wound, pressed his own folded kerchief against it with the efficiency of someone who had seen this before. See, and said, and Gideon had remembered these words with total clarity for 38 years, "You don't die here. See, you hear me? You don't die here. You go home and you make something of it." See, he had said his name. Gideon had been fading in and out of consciousness, and the noise of the battle was enormous, and he had been certain in that moment that he had heard it wrong, had misheard some sound as a name. See, that the name would come back to him when his head cleared. See, his head had cleared eventually, on a hospital cot 3 days later, with a wound that the surgeon said should have killed him and hadn't. See, and the name had not come back, and he had carried the not knowing for 38 years the way you carry a weight that you've stopped noticing, because it's been there so long. See, Nathaniel. He had been looking for a man named Nathaniel for 38 years. See, he looked up from the photograph at Clara Bellamy, who was watching him from 3 seats down the table with an expression that had gone very careful and very still, and he understood with the particular, terrible clarity of a man who has just been handed something he spent decades looking for and almost cannot process the receiving of it. He understood what he was looking at. See, Nathaniel Bellamy's granddaughter, who had been scrubbing his floors. See, who had been kneading his bread at 3 a.m. on a wooden crate. See, who had been driving fence posts alone in a frozen field at Cord Hatcher's property for half wages. See, who had given up a scholarship that represented the highest entrance score in the territory so that the daughter of the man who had saved his life would not lose her job and her home. See, all of it had been happening within sight of the house that Gideon Rourke had built. See, for months, while Gideon had been reviewing ledgers and arguing about fence lines and telling himself that other people's personal arrangements were their own business. See, Mr. Rourke. Clara's voice was quiet but firm. "You've gone somewhere. See, come back." He looked at her. He opened his mouth and closed it. See, he was 61 years old, and he could not find the right place to start. See, every sentence he formed began in the wrong place. See, he pushed back from the table and stood up, and he walked to the window that looked out over the dark property, the bunkhouse lights in the distance, the faint outline of the stables. And he stood there with his back to her for a moment. "See, your grandfather," he said, to the window, "the man he helped during the war." See, behind him, he heard the small sound of Clara setting down her cup. "See, that was you," she said. It was not a question. She was smart enough, had been smart enough. He was coming to understand from the very beginning, to read the shape of a thing without needing every piece explained. "See, that was me," he said. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, exactly. See, it was the silence of two people in the presence of something larger than either of them had expected, and neither of them knew immediately what to do with that, and so they were both quiet for a moment out of a kind of respect for the size of it. See, he turned around. Clara was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her yet. See, Not the composure, not the wariness, not the focused, assessing look. See, this was something underneath all of those things, something that had been living below the surface of all that careful control, and the control had just, for one unguarded moment, failed to cover it. See, she looked like someone who had just found out that the story was not the story she thought it was. See, he saved your life, she said. He did. And then you two were separated. See, transferred to different units after the hospital. See, I looked for him after the war ended. I was not systematic about it at first, because I was young and building the ranch and kept thinking there would be time. He said this flatly, as self-criticism, not as excuse. See, by the time I was systematic about it, the trail was cold. See, I hired someone to look into it 10 years ago. Found records that a Nathaniel Bellamy from the Missouri Territory had died in 1878. He paused. See, I didn't know he had a daughter. I didn't know there was anyone left to find. See, Clara's hands were in her lap now, both of them, the bandaged ones, and she was looking at the table in front of her. See, he died thinking he never found out what happened to you, she said. See, Mama said it bothered him, that he never knew, I know. See, he would have, she stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. See, the composure was reassembling itself. He could watch it happen, the way she called it back when she felt something getting too large. See, he would have been glad, she said quietly, that you built something. See, Gideon looked at the tintype still lying on the table between their two-place settings. See, the photograph of a man in his 30s who had decided, in a field full of smoke and noise and very good reasons to keep moving, that one more person deserved a chance. See, he picked it up and carried it back to the table and set it gently in front of Clara. See, she looked at it. Then she picked it up and held it in both hands the way she always did. He understood now, not just out of habit, but because it was the way she held on to something she did not want to lose. See, his granddaughter, Gideon said, has the highest entrance score in the territory. See, she looked up at him. He saved my life, Gideon said, and I built a cattle ranch with it. See, which is not nothing. He sat back down at the table. See, but it is somewhat less than what he had in mind when he told me to go home and make something of it. See, Clara's eyes were bright. She was not going to cry. He was beginning to understand that she had decided at some point in the last several months, see, that crying was a thing she could not afford and had adjusted her interior landscape accordingly. But her eyes were bright with the particular shine of someone who is holding something in that wants to come out. See, the letters you sent today, she said. Yes, they're about the scholarship. See, Wesley Pike is riding to town before dawn. He'll have the courier deliver both letters and wait for a response. He looked at her steadily. See, I'm not going to promise you it works. The board may say no. See, Whitfield may not have as much influence as I believe he does. See, the deadline may simply be the deadline. He paused. See, but I am going to try every reasonable thing in my reach, and I am going to do it tonight because there isn't time to do it slowly. See, Clara was quiet for a moment. The bright in her eyes had steadied into something else, not the bright of held-back tears, but the bright of someone who is actually, genuinely thinking, turning a problem over in her hands. See if it works, she said. If the board agrees to extend the deadline. See, I still have to submit the signed paperwork in person. She paused. See, there's a process. The acceptance has to be witnessed and notarized and submitted to the regional board office, not just mailed to the capital. See, I know. Dale found out this morning. She blinked. See, you planned this before you even spoke to me. I looked into it, he said. See, planning would have been premature. The regional board office is in Millhaven. She said it as though testing whether he knew this. See, 40 miles. The roads between here and there are not. See, I know the roads between here and Millhaven. I've ridden them in worse conditions than anything we're likely to see this week. He looked at her. See, if the board agrees to an extension, see, we ride to Millhaven. See, we submit the paperwork. See, and we ride back. See, one day. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The look had gone very level, not the wariness, not the assessment, something that was more fundamental than either of those. See, the look of someone deciding whether a thing is real. See, why, she said, very quiet. I know what you told me before. See, that it happened on your property, that you had the means. She paused. See, but that's not why. Not all of it. So tell me the actual reason. See, he was quiet for a moment. A log in the fireplace at the far end of the dining room shifted and sent up a small shower of sparks. See, because your grandfather told me to go home and make something of it, he said. See, and I have spent 38 years arguing with myself about whether I have. He looked at the tintype in her hands. See, I think this is the answer. The silence after that was different from the silence before. See, warmer, like the difference between the cold air outside the cabin and the air inside, after you've gotten the wood stove going properly. See, Clara set the tintype down on the table in front of her. See, she straightened it so it was parallel with the edge of the table. See, a small, careful, deliberate motion. All right, she said. See, that was all. All right. He understood this by now as her most complete form of agreement. See, he slept that night, actually slept, not the hours of staring that had become his default, and when he woke before dawn, he could hear, distantly, Wesley Pike's horse leaving the property at speed. See, which meant Dale had gotten the letters to Wesley, and Wesley had understood the assignment, which was what Gideon had trusted would happen. See, because Wesley Pike was 26 and reliable in the way that young men are reliable when you've given them real responsibility and paid attention to the fact that they've earned it. See, he got up and dressed and went to the kitchen. Clara was already there. See, he stopped in the doorway. She was not on the crate. See, she was not kneading bread. She was sitting at the small table in the corner of the kitchen that the household staff used for their own meals, with a cup of something hot in front of her, and she had a book open on the table, and she was reading. See, or had been reading. She looked up when he came in. See, Hugh doesn't come in until 6, she said. I know when Hugh comes in. See, Mama slept through the night. I checked at 4. See, good. He moved to the stove, which Clara had apparently already built up, and poured himself coffee from the pot she'd already made. See, he noticed she had done these things and did not comment on them. See, she noticed him not commenting and did not comment on that. See, he sat down at the far end of the staff table with his coffee, and she turned back to her book, and for a while the only sound in the kitchen was the stove and the book's pages when she turned them. See, what are you reading? He said after a while. She angled the cover toward him without looking up. See, a book on mathematics. Specifically, a dense one. He recognized the title as the kind of text that was used in advanced coursework, not introductory study. See, that's not light reading. I haven't been doing light reading. See, she paused, and something flickered across her expression that he'd come to recognize as the place where she decided how much to say, keeping up as best I can. See, on my own. The teacher at the school in town has been leaving books on the fence post at the road when she has extra copies. A pause. See, she doesn't know why I'm not in school. I told her I was needed at home. See, he looked at her over his coffee cup. She had been keeping up. See, on her own. While working nights in his kitchen and days at Hatcher's fence line and managing her mother's illness and maintaining the fiction to Lenora that everything was fine. See, she had been keeping up with advanced mathematics from books left on a fence post. See, he thought about the highest entrance score in the territory. See, he thought about what that score represented in a 17-year-old girl who was, simultaneously, doing all of the other things she had been doing. See, you're going to be a remarkable teacher, he said, eh? See, she looked up from the book. He said it the same way he said most things directly, without decoration, the way you state a fact. See, not a compliment exactly. A conclusion based on available evidence. See, she held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the book. See, I haven't gotten there yet. No, but you will. She didn't respond to that. See, but she didn't look away from the book in the way of someone retreating from a subject. See, she looked at it in the way of someone who has been told something they needed to hear and is choosing to keep it quietly for later when they're alone. See, the morning moved on. Harlow came at 9 and spent 20 minutes with Lenora, and came out to tell Gideon that the improvement was real and not optimistic imagination, that the warmth and the medicine were doing what they were supposed to do, and that if this continued for the next week, he would be considerably more confident about the long term. He also told Gideon that Lenora had demanded, from her sickbed, to know the full situation regarding her daughter's scholarship, and that Gideon should be prepared for a conversation. He was not prepared for the conversation. He knocked on the guest room door at 10 o'clock, and Clara Bellamy's voice came back immediately, still not strong, still carrying the roughness that the illness had put into it, but present and alert in a way that indicated she had been awake and waiting. Come in, she said. He came in. He had been in many difficult conversations in his life. He had negotiated land disputes and fired men who'd worked for him for years and sat across from bankers who wanted to take his property and told them they were not going to. None of those had quite the texture of this one. Lenora was sitting up in the bed, which was itself an act of considerable will, given that Harlow had told her to rest. She was pale, and her eyes had shadows under them that hadn't been there 6 months ago, and she was clearly not entirely well, but she was sitting up, and she had done something with her hair, pulled it back. Made it presentable, and her hands were folded in her lap, and her back was straight. She looked at him with an expression that was composed and dignified, and also, underneath those things, very tired in a way that was not about sleep. You knew, she said. How long? Since last night. And before last night? I noticed nothing. He said it flatly, taking the full weight of it. I did not notice that you were ill, or that Clara had left school, or that any of this was happening. He paused. That is a failure, and I own it. Lenora looked at him for a moment. Her expression shifted slightly, not softening exactly, but something in it released. She didn't want you to know. I understand that. Lenora stopped. Her hands, still folded in her lap, tightened together once and then relaxed. She was trying to manage it. She's always been a manager. Since she was small. A pause, too small, too young to be managing things that large. Yes, the scholarship. Lenora's voice went quieter. She told me this morning. All of it. She looked at her hands. She turned down the scholarship. She deferred the scholarship, Gideon said carefully. I sent letters last night. There's a chance the deadline can be extended. Lenora looked up. The tired eyes focused with a sharpness he recognized he could see, suddenly and clearly, where Clara's particular quality of focus came from. What kind of chance? I don't know yet. Wesley Pike is waiting in town for a response. Lenora was quiet for a moment. Why are you doing this? She said. Very direct, with none of the deference that 9 years of employment tended to put into these conversations. She said it the way an equal would ask it. He told her. He did not say it the way he'd said it to Clara, building to it slowly, letting the shape of it emerge. He said it directly because he thought Lenora was the kind of woman who would respect directness more than she'd respect the long way around. He told her about the war and about Nathaniel and about 38 years of a name he could not quite reconstruct clearly enough to find. He told her about the photograph and the recognition and what it had done to him to understand, in the space between one breath and the next, where he had been and what had been happening around him without his seeing it. Lenora listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. He looked for you, she said finally. After the war. He wrote some letters. Nothing came back. She paused. He said there were so many men that it was impossible to find one specific man in all that after. I know. He didn't talk about it often, but it mattered to him. She looked at the window, the south-facing one, letting in the November light. She stopped, and her composure did what Clara's had done the night before, not breaking, but showing briefly what was underneath it. He was a good man, she said. He deserved to know. He deserved a great deal, Gideon said, including a daughter who wasn't scrubbing someone else's floors. Lenora's chin lifted. I earned my wages. You did. Every one of them. I'm not disputing that. he looked at her directly. See, I'm saying that the man who saved my life deserved to have his family taken care of in a way I failed to ensure because I wasn't paying attention. He paused. See, I intend to correct that. She held his gaze for a long moment. See, the lift of the chin, yes, he could see it plainly now. That lifted chin that Clara had when she was deciding something, and then a slow breath. See, Clara has to want it, Lenora said. She won't accept charity. See, not because she's proud, well, a brief, complicated expression. See, not only because she's proud, because she doesn't want to owe anyone anything she hasn't earned. See, she never has. See, I know.
He thought about Clara in the kitchen, saying, "There's a difference."
And Clara in the field, saying, I've been protecting my mother and Clara at the dinner table, pushing her chair back to check on Lenora before Gideon told her to sit down. See, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering what should have been offered a long time ago. He paused. See, and I'm offering the scholarship letter on the table in Millhaven, which she earned entirely without my help, and which she is going to accept. See, Lenora looked at him. And then something happened to her expression that he had not expected and was not prepared for, a kind of release, a letting go of something that had been held in place for a very long time through pure force of will. See, and her eyes went bright, and she looked away quickly toward the window, and he looked away also because it was the right thing to do. See, they sat in silence for a moment. He told me, Lenora said to the window, that the man he pulled out of that field was going to be someone worth saving. A pause. See, he said he could tell, that there are men you can tell about. She paused again. See, I didn't always believe him when he said things like that. See, he could be another pause, smaller, generous in his assessments of people. See, Gideon said nothing. But he wasn't wrong about you, she said. See, from what I can see, that was all she said. From what I can see. See, with the particular quality of a judgment that has not been given easily and is not to be argued with. See, he excused himself from the room shortly after and went to stand in the hallway and put one hand flat against the wall for a moment and breathe. See, 61 years old, cattle baron, not a sentimental man. See, he stood in the hallway for a while. At 2 in the afternoon, he heard a horse arriving at speed from the direction of town and went to the front door. See, Wesley Pike came off the horse before it had fully stopped. He was young enough to do that without breaking anything, and he was already pulling an envelope from his coat as he came up the front steps. See, Gideon took the envelope and opened it on the front porch, with Wesley standing there still breathing hard from the ride, and he read the letter inside. See, he read it twice. Wesley was watching him with the barely contained energy of someone who has done his job well and knows it and is waiting to find out if it matters. See, good man, Gideon said. He folded the letter. Go get your horse seen to. See, he went inside. He walked directly to the kitchen, where he knew Clara would be, because he had come to understand that the kitchen was where she went when she needed something to do with her hands and her energy. See, she was there. She was chopping vegetables for Hugh, who was standing at the far end of the kitchen, pretending to be very focused on his stove. See, she looked up when Gideon came in. He put the letter on the work table in front of her. See, she looked at it. She looked at the education board seal on the outside of the envelope. See, she set down the knife. She picked up the letter and opened it and read it. See, he watched her read it. He watched her read it a second time, more slowly. See, he watched her put it down on the table and put both hands flat on either side of it, the same way she'd had both hands flat on the table in the kitchen before dawn that morning. See, they agreed, she said. Extended through Monday, he said. See, which means if we ride tomorrow, we can have the signed paperwork in Millhaven by Friday afternoon. See, Clara looked at the letter. She was not going to cry. See, he knew that about her now. She was not going to cry, and she was not going to say something large and full of words, because that was not how she was built. See, she picked up the letter and folded it carefully along its original crease lines, and she put it in the pocket of her apron. See, then she picked up the knife and went back to chopping vegetables. See, after a moment she said, without looking up, you should eat a good dinner tonight. See, 40 miles is a long ride. Hugh, at the far end of the kitchen, made a very small sound that was not quite a cough. See, Gideon looked at the side of Clara's face, the focused, downturned face of someone chopping carrots with the careful attention of someone who is using the task to hold something else in place. See, I will, he said. He left the kitchen. In the hallway alone, he opened his hand and looked at it for a moment, the scarred knuckles, the lined palm. See, the hands that had built iron hollow from nothing. And he thought about Nathaniel Bellamy's hands, grabbing him under the arms in a smoke-filled field 38 years ago and dragging him towards something he hadn't been able to see yet. See, he thought this is what it was for. He closed his hand and went back to his study, and for the first time in 31 years, he didn't open the ledger. See, he was up before 4 the next morning. Not because he'd set himself to wake early, he hadn't needed an alarm clock in 30 years. See, his body had its own arrangements about that, but because he'd been lying awake since 2 and had eventually decided that lying there was a waste of good darkness. See, he dressed in the cold of his room, the kind of cold that comes into a Montana house in November, no matter how good the wood stove is. See, and he went downstairs and built up the kitchen stove himself because Hugh wouldn't be in for another 2 hours, and he wanted coffee now. See, he was standing at the stove watching the pot when he heard footsteps in the hallway. See, Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed for riding a heavy jacket he hadn't seen before, worn at the elbows, boots that had been resoled at least once. See, she had her hair braided back, and she was carrying a small canvas bag over one shoulder. See, she looked at him standing at the stove and did not appear surprised. See, "You're up early," she said. "So are you?" I checked on Mama. She came into the kitchen and sat down at the staff table, setting the bag on the floor beside her chair. See, she's sleeping. Her breathing sounds better. A pause. See, I left a note for when she wakes up. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it, because it was 4 in the morning and the answer was obviously yes. See, she wrapped both hands around it, the same way she'd done the night before, the same automatic reaching for warmth. See, "You should eat something before we go," he said. "I was going to say the same to you." See, he found bread from the day before and cut 2 pieces and put them on the table and sat down across from her, and they ate in the same comfortable silence that had developed in the last 2 days. See, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling because both people in it have accepted each other's company without requiring it to be performed. See, the ride to Millhaven took most of the morning. The road between Iron Hollow and Millhaven was not, as Clara had noted the night before, a forgiving one. See, it had been a decent road in late summer, but November had done things to it. Frost heave in some places, mud where the drainage ran wrong. See, one stretch near Cutler Creek, where the road dissolved into something that was more suggestion than surface, and you just picked your way through and hoped the horses agreed with your line. See, Gideon rode his big gray, the one he'd had for 6 years, steady and deliberate. See, Clara rode a bay mare from the Iron Hollow stable that Dale had selected without being asked, which was the kind of thing Dale did when he'd correctly assessed a situation and wanted to be useful without making a production of it. See, the mare was sure-footed, and Clara handled her well, not showy, not hesitant, the riding of someone who grew up around horses without having had the luxury of riding for pleasure. See, they didn't talk much for the first hour. The land was doing what Montana land does in November, presenting itself in the flat, stripped-down version, all the summer softness gone, just the bones of the thing showing. See, the sky was a uniform pale gray that could have meant anything from clear and cold to incoming weather. See, "Tell me about the academy," Gideon said when they were past the worst of the Cutler Creek section and on better ground. See, Clara looked at him from the back of the bay mare. See, "What about it? What does the program look like?" See, "How long?" 2 years of coursework, then a year of supervised teaching in a placement school. She paused. See, "I'd be assigned to a frontier school somewhere in the territory." See, "Most of the graduates end up in small towns or rural areas." She said this without any shade of complaint. See, "Just information. Places that can't attract trained teachers easily." See, "Is that what you want? Rural placement?" She considered that for a moment. See, "The The kind of considering that wasn't performance. She was actually thinking about it, not just forming an answer. See, I grew up in a place like that, she said. I know what it's like when the teacher is good and what it's like when she isn't. See, the difference is she paused. See, when you're a child and you're in a place where not much is available and someone puts the right book in your hands and makes you understand why it matters, that's it changes the shape of what you think is possible. She paused again, shorter. See, so yes, that's what I want. He looked at the road ahead. See, your grandfather would understand that, he said. See, she didn't respond immediately. When she did, it was quiet. See, Mama said he used to read to her every night when she was small. See, he taught himself to read after the war, from a Bible someone gave him at the hospital. A pause. See, he didn't want her to have to teach herself anything. See, he wanted her to just know. She let the sentence rest. See, she did the same for me. The road climbed slightly, giving them a long view of the valley below and the range on the far side. See, Gideon had ridden this stretch enough times that he'd stopped seeing it the way you stop seeing things you know too well. See, he tried to see it now with something like fresh eyes and found it was genuinely hard. See, you couldn't just decide to see things fresh. You had to be changed in some way first. See, he thought he might be in the middle of being changed. See, it was not a comfortable feeling. It was also not, he was finding, an entirely unwelcome one. See, my wife would have liked you, he said. It came out without his planning it. See, he was not generally given to this kind of remark. See, Clara looked at him with a mild surprise that she contained quickly. See, I didn't know you had a wife, she said. 20 years ago. See, Eleanor. He said the name the way you say a word that has been worn smooth by long use. See, she was the one who argued for taking on household staff in the first place. See, I thought we could manage without. She pointed out that I was wrong, in the particular way she had of pointing things out that made it impossible to argue back. He paused. See, she would have noticed your mother's situation within a week. See, she would have done something about it within a day of noticing. He kept his eyes on the road. See, she was better at people than I am. Clara was quiet for a moment. See, she sounds like she was good, she was. Did you have children? See, no, short, not harsh, but not an opening for more. See, she understood this and didn't push. See, they rode in silence for a while. See, and then Clara said, see, without particular preamble, see, what made you stay? See, after she died. See, at Iron Hollow. See, some men would have sold and gone somewhere else. See, he thought about that. It was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer rather than the short, deflecting kind. See, I didn't know what else to be, he said finally. See, Iron Hollow was the thing I'd built. Without it, I was just an old soldier with bad memories and no particular purpose. He paused. See, that's not entirely a good reason to stay somewhere. See, but it was the reason. And now, she said. He looked at her. See, now, he said, I think it might also be a place where something worthwhile happens. See, if I'm paying attention. Clara held his gaze for a moment and then turned back to the road ahead, and the set of her shoulders was slightly different after that. See, less braced. He noticed it without remarking on it. See, they reached Millhaven shortly before noon. See, the town was larger than it looked on paper, a proper main street with a bank and 2 general stores and a hotel and the usual peripheral businesses that gathered around any place that served as a regional center. See, the Territorial Education Board's regional office was in a 2-story building on the east end of the main street that had been, at some earlier point in its life, a hardware store. See, the previous purpose was still faintly visible in the bones of the place, the wide front windows. See, the high ceiling inside, but someone had added a front desk and filing cabinets and a row of wooden chairs along one wall and put up a painted sign, and now it was bureaucracy. See, there was a man behind the front desk who looked at them when they came in with the standard expression of a territorial bureaucrat. See, which was roughly equivalent to the expression of someone who is prepared to be unhelpful unless given specific reason not to be. See, Gideon stated their business directly. See, he was here with Clara Bellamy, scholarship recipient, to submit her signed acceptance documents under the extension granted by the board 2 days prior, reference letter from the capital, which he produced from his coat pocket. See, he set it on the desk and looked at the man and waited. See, the man read the letter. He read it twice. See, his expression during the reading progressed through several stages. The most important of which was the stage where he recognized Amos Whitfield's signature, and the stage where he recognized Gideon Rourke's name on the accompanying correspondence. See, both of which visibly adjusted his assessment of the situation. See, I'll need the recipient to sign the acceptance form in my presence, the man said. See, and it needs to be witnessed. That's why we're here, Gideon said. See, the forms took 30 minutes. Not because they were complicated, they weren't, but because the man behind the desk had a process, and the process was going to be followed completely. See, which Gideon accepted with more patience than he would normally have brought to this kind of thing. See, he sat in one of the wooden chairs along the wall, while Clara stood at the desk and signed each form where indicated, reading each one before she signed it, which the desk man seemed to find both surprising and slightly inconvenient. See, as it slowed down the process, he preferred to move through quickly. See, Gideon watched her read each form. He watched her take her time and not apologize for taking it. See, he watched her ask one question about the terms of the scholarship if the placement school changed after the first year that the desk man had to look up. See, and the desk man's expression during the looking up was the expression of someone who had not been asked that question before and was not entirely certain he was finding the right answer. See, Clara waited. She didn't fill the waiting with reassurances that it was fine or apologies for the inconvenience. See, she just waited, and eventually the desk man found the relevant regulation and read it to her, and she nodded and signed the form. See, when the last form was signed and witnessed and stamped with the regional seal, the desk man handed Clara a receipt of submission and said, with slightly more warmth than he'd managed at the beginning, see, that she would receive formal confirmation from the capital within 2 weeks. See, thank you, Clara said. She said it the way she said most things direct, without performance. See, the desk man blinked slightly, as if he'd been expecting something more elaborate, and then said she was welcome and good luck to her. See, they walked out of the building and stood on the wooden sidewalk in the cold November air. See, Clara was holding the receipt of submission in both hands. See, she was looking at it. The street around them had the usual midday activity of a regional town, a wagon going past, 2 men talking outside the general store, a dog crossing the road with the focused air of a dog that has somewhere specific to be. See, it's done, Gideon said. It's done, she said. She folded the receipt carefully and put it inside her jacket in the interior pocket close. See, he watched her do that and looked away. Are you hungry? He said. See, she let out a breath that was almost a laugh, extremely. See, they ate at the hotel dining room, which was the best option in Millhaven for actual food, as opposed to the kind of food that was just calories arranged on a plate. See, the dining room was half full at noon with the usual combination of traveling businessmen and local regulars. See, and a woman at the far table who was watching Clara and Gideon with the barely concealed curiosity of someone who had already constructed a story about them and was satisfied with it. See, Gideon ignored her. Clara appeared not to notice, which he suspected was not entirely true. See, the food was decent, a beef and potato dish that was hot and filling, which was the main requirement after a cold morning ride. See, they ate with more conversation than the morning ride had produced, some of it practical and some of it less so. See, Lenora, Gideon said when they were most of the way through the meal. See, her position at Iron Hollow. Clara looked up. I want to formalize it, he said. See, not the position she had, the one she'll have when she's recovered. See, I've been running this house for 31 years without anyone actually managing it. See, I've just had a series of people doing individual tasks without anyone coordinating them or responsible for the overall functioning. He paused. See, that's an inefficiency I should have addressed a long time ago. See, the position I'm creating is head housekeeper. See, she would manage the household staff. See, the accounts. See, the supply ordering. See, the planning for the hands' meals. See, he looked at Clara steadily. See, it is a real job with real authority, and a salary that reflects both of those things. See, it is not charity. Clara's expression was careful. See, he could see her working through it, the question of whether it was real or shaped to look real, whether it was an actual job that needed doing or something constructed to justify giving Clara Bellamy better circumstances. See, the household account, she said. She'd have to know bookkeeping. See, I'd teach her. You'd teach her. Is that surprising? See, a pause a little. I keep my own accounts. I've done it for 30 years. See, it's not a mystery. He picked up his coffee. Your mother is a capable woman. See, she'll learn it faster than most, and if she can't, see, then we'll figure out what she can do and do that instead. He set the coffee down. See, Clara, I'm not building a trap. I'm trying to reorganize something that has been wrong for a long time and make it right. See, that's all. She looked at him for a moment. She'll want to earn it. See, she will earn it. There's no version of that job that doesn't require earning it. See, the house is large and the staff is 12 people, and the accounts are not simple. He paused. See, I'm not removing the work. I'm removing the conditions that made the work dangerous. See, Clara was quiet. She looked down at her plate. When she looked up, the carefully assembled composure had an opening in it, not breaking, never fully breaking, but showing the underneath. See, she deserves something good, Clara said, quiet, plain. See, I know, he said, equally plain. She nodded once, short and decisive, and picked up her fork. See, the ride back started at 2, and the light was already thinking about failing by the time they were an hour out of Millhaven. See, which was the nature of November in Montana. The days had been shrinking for weeks, and would keep shrinking until the solstice, and you planned around it, or you found yourself riding in the dark. See, Gideon had planned around it. He kept a reasonable pace without pushing the horses in the cold, and they rode with the particular efficiency of two people who both wanted to be back and understood the same route home. See, they were 2 miles from the Iron Hollow gate when Clara pulled up the bay mare suddenly enough that Gideon stopped the gray and looked back. See, she had stopped in the middle of the road, and she was looking at something to the left toward the eastern section of the property, toward the fence line where he'd found her 2 days ago, driving the post alone, with the cord rigged to keep it plumb. See, that fence, she said. He followed her look. She was right from this angle and distance you could see that the section she'd been working on was not the only section with problems. See, there were 2 posts in the visible stretch that were leaning in a way that would become a real issue by spring. See, Dale will have it seen to, he said. Before winter sets in properly, she was still looking at the fence with the assessing eye of someone who knows fence work. See, those 2 are going to come fully loose in the first hard freeze. See, that whole section needs. Clara, she looked at him. See, you are not going to fix that fence, he said. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week. See, she held his gaze. The chin came up. I was just noting. See, I know what you were noting. Dale knows that section. See, he's been ranching for 11 years. He looked at her steadily. See, you spent 6 months holding everything together by yourself. See, you can stop now. She looked back at the fence. Something moved in her expression, a kind of resistance that was not stubbornness exactly, but was the close cousin of it. See, the resistance of someone who has been in emergency mode for so long that the emergency has become the normal, and being told it's over doesn't feel like relief. See, it feels like being told to put down a weight that you've been carrying so long you've forgotten it's not part of your body. See, it's hard, she said, not complaining, just noting. See, I expect it is. I keep making lists of what needs doing. She paused. See, in my head, things that need to be handled. I've been doing it for 6 months. Another pause. See, even last night, trying to sleep, I was going through the list. She paused a final time. See, the list is shorter now. It doesn't know what to do with itself. See, he looked at her, 17 years old, on a horse in the early failing November light, telling him that her brain didn't know how to stop running emergency protocols because it had been doing it for half a year. See, he felt the cold anger again, not at her. See, not at Lenora. See, not at the specific circumstances. See, just at the general fact of it. See, at the waste of a 17-year-old's peace of mind. See, when you get to the academy, he said, You'll have enough to think about that the list will find new material. See, she looked at him, and the ghost of the smile came back, the one that wasn't quite a smile, but was the shape of one. See, that's actually reassuring. I'm occasionally reassuring, he said. See, don't tell anyone. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. See, he turned the gray toward home. They came through the iron hollow gate in the last real light of the afternoon. See, Dale was in the yard, and he looked up when they came in, read their expressions in the way Dale read most things quickly and accurately and without needing to be told, and gave a small nod that meant he understood the day had gone well. See, he took the horses without being asked, and Gideon and Clara walked toward the main house. See, at the front steps, Clara stopped. I want to tell her myself, she said. See, before dinner. Just I want her to hear it from me. See, of course. She started up the steps, then stopped again and turned back to him. See, he was still at the bottom of the steps, and so they were briefly at the same height, which was unusual. See, and she looked at him at that level for a moment, with an expression he hadn't seen before, not any of the ones he'd catalogued over the last 3 days, but something new and less constructed. See, something that was just her face without any of the armoring. See, thank you, she said. I know I said that before. See, after the hands. But she paused. This was different. See, today was different. He looked at her. He thought about 38 years of carrying a debt he didn't know how to pay. See, he thought about a man in a smoky Virginia field who had made a decision and not explained it and not waited for thanks. See, he thought about Clara Bellamy sitting up straight in a sickbed to speak to him as an equal. See, he thought about Clara on a fruit crate with bleeding hands and a scholarship letter in her satchel. See, your grandfather saved my life, he said, and told me to make something of it. A pause. See, I've been trying to figure out what that meant for a long time. He looked at her steadily. See, I think I'm starting to understand it. She held his gaze for a moment longer. See, then she went up the steps and inside. He stood at the bottom of the steps for a while in the cold. See, and then he went around to the stable to check on the horses because Dale had taken them in, but the gray had been favoring his left foreleg slightly in the last mile, and Gideon wanted to see to that himself. See, the gray's leg was fine, a small stone bruise, nothing serious, some liniment and a day's rest, and it would be forgotten. See, Gideon worked the liniment in himself, which was something he could have asked any of the hands to do, but which he preferred to do himself for his own horses. See, and the gray stood patiently and occasionally turned his big head to look at Gideon with the mild, accepting gaze of an animal that has known someone for long enough to simply be in their presence without event. See, Dale came into the stable while Gideon was finishing. See, scholarship secure, Dale said, submitted and receded. See, Dale was quiet for a moment, moving around the far end of the stable, checking the latch on a stall door. See, Miss Clara seems, he stopped, reconsidered, started again. See, she's a capable young woman. She is. Reminds me of the way you ran things in the early years. See, before you had money to hire people, just doing what needed doing and not making speeches about it. See, Gideon looked at the gray. That's not a bad comparison. See, no, Dale checked the latch and seemed satisfied. See, Wesley says you're thinking about some changes. For the property. See, families. Gideon had mentioned this to Wesley in a moment that was probably more candid than he usually allowed himself to be with his own staff, which was possibly the result of the last 3 days doing something to his usual reserve. See, I'm thinking about it, he said. The housing for families with children is not adequate. See, I've known this for a while, he paused. I've been managing it as a logistics problem. See, I think it's a different kind of problem. Dale was quiet for a moment. See, the Perez family, he said. Their boy is 9. Bright kid. See, there's no school within 12 miles. I know, and the Henderson kids. See, 2 of them. Another pause. If a person were going to address that kind of thing. See, I said I'm thinking about it, Gideon said. Let me think about it. See, yes, sir. But Dale had the satisfied expression of someone who has said what he intended to say and gotten the response he expected and can now consider the matter progressing. See, he left the stable. Gideon finished with the gray and put up the liniment and stood in the stable for a moment, with the smell of horses and hay around him and the sound of the animals settling into the evening. And he thought about the Perez boy, who was 9 years old and bright and 12 miles from school, and he thought about the Henderson children. And he thought about what a frontier school needed in terms of teachers, and what Iron Hollow was and what it might also be, and the shape of something was forming in the back of his mind that wasn't fully formed yet, but was becoming real. He went inside for dinner. Lenora was not in the guest room when Clara went to tell her. She was in the kitchen. This was both against Harlow's instructions and entirely predictable, and Clara found her standing at the work table, showing Hugh a more efficient way to organize his prep work, which Lenora had apparently identified within 2 minutes of being in the kitchen and had felt compelled to address. She was pale and moving more carefully than her usual self, but she was upright and present, and directing the arrangement of cutting boards with the particular authority of a woman who has been running a house for years and knows how things should go. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her mother and felt something crack open in her chest in a way that was not painful, exactly more like the way ice cracks in spring, which sounds like breaking but is actually thawing. Lenora saw her in the doorway. "You're back," Lenora said. "You're supposed to be resting," Clara said. "I've been resting all day." Hugh was organizing his workspace incorrectly. Lenora looked at her daughter with the particular focused attention of a mother who is reading something in her child's face and does not need to be told what it is. "Come here." Clara went to her. Lenora put both hands on either side of Clara's face the way she had done when Clara was small, and she looked at her for a moment without saying anything. And Clara felt the crack in her chest widen into something that was not going to be controlled much longer. "It's done," Lenora said. "It's done." Lenora nodded. She pulled Clara forward and pressed her forehead against Clara's. They stayed like that for a moment, 2 women in a kitchen in November, with Hugh standing at the far end of his stove, pretending not to exist, which he managed reasonably well. He told me," Lenora said quietly, "about your grandfather." "I know. Are you all right with it?" Clara thought about this honestly. It was a complicated question, and Lenora was asking it in the complicated way, not the simple, reassuring way. Are you all right with the shape of the thing? With how it changes the story? With what it means? "Yes," Clara said, "I think I am." A pause. Grandfather would have appreciated it. The way it came around. He would have laughed, Lenora said softly. He had a sense of humor about that kind of thing. The way things circle back. She pulled back and looked at her daughter. He would have liked Mr. Rourke. "I think so too," Clara said. Dinner that evening was different from the 2 before it. Not louder, not more festive. Gideon's house was not a festive place, and no single event was going to alter that particular quality overnight. But something had shifted in the temperature of the room. Lenora joined them at the table for the first time, over Clara's mild protest about whether she should be up, and she sat at the table with the same upright dignity she'd shown in the sickbed. And when Hugh brought the food, she assessed its preparation with the professional eye of someone already mentally occupying a new role. Gideon outlined the position as he had described it to Clara in Millhaven, the full scope, the authority, the salary figure, which he named plainly without preamble. Lenora listened to all of it without interrupting, which was itself a form of listening he respected, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The ounce," she said. "I've never done formal bookkeeping." "I know. I'll teach you." She looked at him with the same level directness she'd used from the sickbed. "I learn quickly. I expect you to." Another pause. "And if I find the system you're using is inefficient." The corner of his mouth moved in what, on another man's face, would have been more clearly a smile. "Tell me and we'll address it." Lenora nodded once, decisive. "Then yes," she said. Across the table, Clara was looking at her coffee cup with the expression of someone who is feeling something large and is using the coffee cup as an anchor. The evening wound down in the way evenings do, when the people in them are all genuinely tired, not abruptly, but gradually, conversation slowing, and then resting entirely, the fire in the dining room hearth burning lower. See, Lenora went back to the guest room with Clara hovering and not quite fussing. See, Hugh cleaned the kitchen with more care than usual, which was his way of marking that something had happened in the house that was worth the extra attention. See, Gideon sat in his study. He had the ledger out. See, not because he was reviewing it, he'd reviewed everything yesterday, and it was in order, but because it was what he did in the evenings, and he was not sure yet what he did in the evenings if he wasn't reviewing ledgers. See, he was going to have to figure that out. He was also thinking about the Perez boy and the Henderson children, and the school that didn't exist within 12 miles of them. See, he was thinking about what a Teachers Academy graduate needed in terms of a placement. See, he was thinking about what Iron Hollow could be and had not yet been. See, he picked up his pen and opened a fresh page in the notebook he kept for plans that were too preliminary for the official ledger. See, he wrote a heading at the top of the page. Not a formal heading, just a few words to mark the territory of the idea. See, he looked at what he'd written. It was not a complete plan. See, it was the beginning of one. It was the sketch of something that would take months to build and would require conversations with Dale and with the families on the property and with the county and possibly with the Territorial Education Board, see, which he now had a somewhat better relationship with than he'd had a week ago. See, it was the beginning of something that Gideon Rourke, 6 days ago, would not have thought was his business. See, he looked at the pen in his scarred hand, the hand that had built Iron Hollow. See, the hand that had been grabbed by another man's hands in a smoky Virginia field and pulled away from a death that was entirely certain toward a future that was not. See, he thought about what Nathaniel Bellamy had said to him in that field. See, you go home and you make something of it. He thought about what making something of it meant and realized he had been thinking about that wrong for 38 years. See, he had thought it meant building, and he had built. See, but building was not the same as making something of it. See, building was just the accumulation of things. Making something of it, that was what you did with the things once you had them. See, that was the actual instruction. He had taken 38 years and a girl on a wooden crate in the middle of the night to understand the difference. See, he wrote a few more notes on the preliminary page. See, outside the study window, Iron Hollow lay quiet under the November sky. See, the bunkhouse lights were out. The stables were dark. See, the land went dark and flat in every direction, the way Montana land does at night, immense, unglamorous, just there. See, he had always thought of the silence of this house as a thing to be endured. See, the price of the life he'd chosen. Sitting in his study with the notebook open in front of him, with Lenora Bellamy recovering in the guest room, and Clara Bellamy's receipt of scholarship submission sitting in the interior pocket of her jacket, see, he thought that the silence was the same silence it had always been. See, but he was not the same man sitting in it. He closed the notebook. See, he put the pen down. He looked at the cold cup of coffee on the corner of the desk and decided he didn't want it. See, he went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in longer than he could cleanly remember. See, and he lay in the dark and thought about the preliminary notes in the notebook and the Perez boy and the Henderson children and the shape of the thing he was beginning to build, and the thinking was not the circular, see, grinding kind that had kept him staring at the ceiling for years. See, it was the forward kind, the kind that knows it has somewhere to go. See, the winter that followed was the hardest Montana had thrown at the territory in 11 years. See, Dale said this with the particular satisfaction of a man who tracks weather the way other men track money. See, citing the depth of the snowpack in January and the number of consecutive nights below zero as evidence of something that deserved to be noted in the record. See, Gideon did not disagree. The winter was hard. The roads between Iron Hollow and the rest of the world became, for stretches of weeks at a time, more theoretical than actual. See, the cattle required constant management. 3 of the older hands got sick and recovered and got sick again. See, the woodpile that Gideon had ordered doubled in October was gone by February, and they had to cut more. See, through all of it, Iron Hollow functioned. This was not a small thing. See, it was, in fact, a thing that Gideon noticed and did not take for granted, because he had run this ranch for 31 years, and he knew the difference between a house that was managed and a house that was simply occupied. See, the difference was Clara Bellamy. She had come back to full capacity in January, 6 weeks after Harlow had found her barely breathing in the cold cabin. See, not all the way the illness had left a signature on her lungs that Harlow said would take the better part of a year to fully clear, but back to something that was functionally Lenora. See, upright and direct and focused, moving through the house with the quiet authority of someone who now had actual authority and knew the scope of it. See, she had taken to the bookkeeping with the concentrated intensity of someone who had always suspected she could do this, and was now being given the chance to confirm it. See, Gideon taught her in the evenings, after dinner, sitting across from each other at the desk in the study, with the ledgers open between them. See, he had expected to be a patient teacher, because patience was something he could summon when the situation required it. See, what he had not expected was how little patience was actually required. See, Lenora asked the right questions. The kind that showed she had already thought 3 steps ahead of where they currently were in the lesson, and was asking not because she was lost, but because she wanted to confirm the path she'd already mapped. See, by the 3rd week, she was reviewing the household supply accounts on her own and flagging items that didn't look right before Gideon had the chance to review them himself. See, she flagged 2 errors in February, both from the supplier in town, who had apparently been overcharging on liniment for 2 years on the assumption that nobody was tracking it closely enough to notice. See, I'll speak to him, Gideon said when she showed him. See, I already wrote the letter, Lenora said. He looked at her. See, she looked back at him with the composed expression of someone who has done exactly what the job required and is not going to apologize for it. See, was that overstepping? He thought about it honestly. See, no, he said, that's the job. She nodded once and went back to her accounts. See, he found he was not bothered by this. He found he was, in a way he didn't examine too directly, something closer to relieved. See, there was something in the house now that had not been there before, not just competence, but presence. See, the particular presence of people who were genuinely part of a place rather than just occupying it by arrangement. See, he hadn't known the house was missing this. He had thought the house was what it was supposed to be. See, he understood now that it had been a very large, very well-maintained shell. See, Clara left for the academy in the last week of January. See, she left on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day of the week, for an extraordinary departure. See, the night before, she sat with Lenora in the guest room. Lenora had stayed in the main house through the worst of the winter, which had been a practical decision that nobody had officially made. See, it had just become true, and Gideon heard them talking through the closed door when he passed in the hallway. See, he did not stop to listen. He went to his study and did not open the ledger, and sat looking at the preliminary notes he'd been expanding for the past 2 months, the ones about the school. See, in the morning, she came to find him before breakfast. See, he was in the stable with the gray, doing the thing he did every morning, a check of the leg, which had healed cleanly from the stone bruise, checking hooves. See, the routine that was partly practical and partly just the kind of grounding that comes from doing a familiar thing with your hands. See, she stood at the stall door, and he became aware of her presence, but finished what he was doing before he turned around. See, she had a canvas bag over her shoulder, larger than the one she'd carried to Millhaven, but still not large. See, she was wearing the coat she'd arrived in, the worn one, the one he'd looked at on the ride to Millhaven and made a note of without saying anything. See, and then he noticed the coat was different. It was the same coat. He could see the repaired seam at the left shoulder that had been letting cold in, but it had been altered. See, new lining. The collar turned and restitched so the worn side was inside. See, Lenora's work he understood without being told. You're ready, he said. See, not a question. I've been ready since October, she said. See, and then quieter. I've been ready for a long time. See, he nodded. He came out of the stall and latched it behind him. See, Dale will drive you to the stage, he said. She paused. See, I want to ask you something before I go. Ask. She looked at him directly. See, the school. The one you're planning for the property families. See, he had not told her about the notebook. Dale must have mentioned it, or Wesley, or she'd simply worked it out from the questions he'd been asking and the things he'd been looking into over the winter. See, he had established firmly in his assessment of her, someone who paid attention. See, what about it, he said. When I finish 3 years from now the placement. She held his gaze. See, I'd like it to be here, if the school exists by then. See, I'd like to come back and teach it. He looked at her. See, he thought about the Perez boy, who was 9 now and would be 12 when Clara finished her training. See, he thought about the Henderson children. He thought about the other families on the property and the ones on neighboring properties who had the same situation. See, he thought about what a school on this land would mean, built on land he owned, taught by a woman who had grown up understanding exactly what it meant to be a child in a frontier place where nobody had thought to put a school. See, the school will exist, he said. I'll see to that. See, and the placement. If the board agrees, and you want it, and you still want it in 3 years, yes. See, Clara nodded. The same short, decisive nod that meant she had heard and filed it, and it was settled. See. Then she looked at him for a moment without the nod, without any of the decisive efficiency, just looking at him with the open expression she'd shown him only once before. On the front steps the evening they'd come back from Millhaven. See, when the composure had briefly shown what was underneath it. See, I'm going to do something with this, she said. I want you to know that. See, I know you know it already, but I want to say it. She paused. See, whatever you think you owed my grandfather, whatever you think this is paying back, you gave more than the debt required. See, I want you to know I understand that. He was quiet for a moment. See, outside, one of the horses shifted in its stall, and the stable made its familiar morning sounds around them. See, your grandfather gave more than the debt required too, he said. See, he didn't know me. He had no reason to go back for me. He looked at her. See, that's what it looks like when someone gives more than the debt requires. See, it doesn't look like accounting. It looks like a choice that doesn't make obvious sense from the outside. See, she held his gaze. The bright was back in her eyes, the controlled bright, the one she managed with the particular discipline of someone who has made a permanent practice of not letting things come undone in front of other people. See, she managed it now, and in managing it somehow made it more visible rather than less. See, take care of her, Clara said. She meant Lenora. He understood this without clarification. See, she takes care of herself, he said. But yes, Clara smiled at that. See, a real one, not the ghost of one, the first fully real smile he had seen from her, and it changed her face in a way that was startling, the way things are startling when they arrive all at once, instead of gradually. See, he understood in that moment exactly what kind of teacher she was going to be. See, the kind that students remember for the rest of their lives. See, Dale drove her to the stage. See, Gideon watched the wagon leave from the front of the house. And then he went back inside and stood in the hallway for a moment and felt the particular quality of a house when someone has just left it the way their absence has its own texture. See, different from the absence of someone who was never there. See, Lenora was in the kitchen directing Hugh on the reorganization of the dry goods storage, which she had determined was inefficient, which it was. See, she did not come out to the hallway. She had already said her goodbye privately the night before. See, she knew the shape of her own grief and where to put it. See, he respected that. He went to his study and opened the notebook with the preliminary plans and read through them with fresh eyes, the eyes of someone who had just made a commitment and was now converting a plan from theoretical to actual, and he, see, made a list of the things that needed to happen first. See, the land survey to identify the right location on the property. See, the conversations with the county about whether a private school on ranch land could be recognized for the family's children as fulfilling the territorial education requirement. See, the lumber costs, the teachers' quarters that would need to be built alongside the school building. See, the conversations with the neighboring ranch families, because the school would need more than just the Iron Hollow children to be viable. See, and there were families on the Hatcher side of the line and the old Calloway place to the north who had children with the same problem and were probably not having conversations about it with anyone. See, he thought about Cord Hatcher briefly. He thought about the half wages and the girl who hadn't been asked her age because knowing would have required paying properly. See, he set that aside. That was last autumn. This was February, and there was work to do. See, he wrote for 2 hours, the forward kind of thinking, the kind with somewhere to go. See, the spring came late and mean, the way Montana springs often did, teasing at warmth in March, and then slamming the door again in April, one last hard freeze that killed half of what had started to bud and forced everyone to start over. See, Gideon had seen it before. You didn't run this land for 31 years without learning that the season didn't care about your schedule, and you built your plans to accommodate that instead of fighting it. See, the school project moved slower than the notebook had suggested it would. See, the county took 3 months to respond to his initial inquiry, and the response was less clear than he'd hoped. Territorial law on privately operated schools and their recognition for mandatory education requirements was, see, as the county administrator put it in a letter that used far more words than the message required, somewhat unsettled. See, Gideon wrote back in the flat, direct voice he used for correspondence that needed to get somewhere and did not have time for circumnavigation. See, he cited 2 specific relevant statutes that his inquiry to a lawyer friend in the capital had identified. See, he suggested that the county administrator review them before responding again. See, the second response was considerably clearer. See, he broke ground on the school building in June, which was when the ground allowed it, and when the lumber he'd ordered had arrived, and when he'd finished the conversations with 7 families from 3 neighboring properties who had agreed, see, after varying degrees of initial skepticism, that yes, a school on Iron Hollow land that their children could attend was something they wanted and had not known how to ask for. See, the Perez boy Miguel, see, who was now 10, and who his fathers described as someone who read everything he could get his hands on and was running out of things to read, came to the construction site on the first day and stood at the edge and watched the foundation work with. See, the focused intensity of a child watching something he's been waiting for. See, Gideon noticed him standing there. "You're Miguel," he said. See, the boy looked up with the slight wariness of a child being directly addressed by an authority figure. See, "Yes, sir, your father says you read everything." See, "Yes, sir." Gideon looked at the foundation work for a moment. See, "Come back when school starts. In the meantime," he paused, thinking of something, "go to the main house." See, "Ask Mrs. Bellamy if she has any books she can spare." See, "Tell her I said it was all right." Miguel looked at him. See, then he looked at the foundation of the school building. See, then he looked back at Gideon with the expression of a child who has just been given something he was not expecting and is processing the receiving of it. See, "Yes, sir," he said, and went at a pace that was technically walking but was very close to running. See, Gideon went back to watching the foundation work. Lenora, when Miguel appeared at the kitchen door an hour later with Gideon's message, see, took him into the house with the calm matter-of-factness of a woman to whom 10-year-old boys appearing at her kitchen door was now simply one of the things that happened in a day. See, she had a small collection of books in her room, not many. She had never had the means for many, but good ones, the kind her father had made sure she had. See, she gave Miguel 2 of them, one a natural history of the American territories, and one a collection of stories she had read to Clara when Clara was small. See, she watched him leave with the books clutched against his chest, and she stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment after he'd gone, and Hugh pretended to be very busy with something on the stove, and Lenora said nothing and went back to her accounts. See, summer brought the building up and the roof on, and the interior finished in a way that was not fancy plain wooden floors, six long tables, A blackboard wall that Dale had sourced from a school supply company in the capital. C. A pot-bellied stove in the corner, but was solid. The kind of building that planned to be there for a long time. C. Gideon walked through the finished interior in August with Dale and without comment reviewed each section with the eye of a man who has built things for 30 years and knows the difference between done and finished. C. There were 3 items he noted. Dale wrote them down. C. They were corrected within a week. Letters came from Clara through all of it. C. Not frequent letters. She was busy in the way that people are busy when they have found the thing they are supposed to be doing and are doing it, with everything available to them. C. But regular enough that Gideon developed a sense of the shape of her days at the academy, the coursework she was advancing through faster than the standard schedule allowed. C. The practice teaching sessions with younger students that she had been assigned to by a faculty fan instructor who had recognized within the first month that she was not a standard student. C. The problems she was working through, not academically. She had no academic problems, but in terms of figuring out what kind of teacher she wanted to be, which methods, which philosophy of what a classroom was supposed to be. C. She wrote these questions to him with the same directness she'd had in the kitchen and on the fence line and on the road to Millhaven, not as someone looking for answers, but as someone thinking out loud and wanting the practice of articulation. C. He wrote back. He was not a natural correspondent. His writing was as direct as his speech, no more. But he found he had things to say to her questions that surprised him, things he wouldn't have known he thought until the question pulled them out. C. Lenora read his replies before he sealed them, when he let her, which was most of the time. C. Once, reading one, she had been quiet for a moment and then said, "You should have had children." In the direct, unadorned way she said most things, and he had looked at the wall for a moment and said, "See, I know." And then they had moved on to discussing the household accounts for October, which were complicated by the cost of supplies for the school. C. He hired a temporary teacher for the school's first year, a young man from the capital named Aldous Reeves, who had credentials and the genuine desire to do the work well, and who was not, as it quickly became clear, C. cut out for frontier conditions in the long term. He lasted the school year. C. He did good work during it. He left in June with a handshake and Gideon's honest reference and the clear-eyed acknowledgement that some people know their own limits and are wise enough to respect them. C. Miguel Perez was 11 by the time school opened. C. He arrived on the first day before anyone else, including Aldous Reeves, and sat in the front row with a straightness of posture that came from excitement too large to otherwise contain. C. He finished the year's material in 7 months. Reeves wrote Gideon a note about it, suggesting that the boy's pace required something the one-room structure couldn't currently provide. C. Gideon wrote to Clara about it. Her response came back in 2 weeks and was 3 pages long, the longest letter she had yet written, and it was a detailed, practical outline of how a single-room school could structure differentiated learning tracks so that a child advancing beyond the standard level could continue moving without either disrupting the other students or being artificially slowed. She had apparently been thinking about exactly this problem for her own eventual classroom and had a framework she'd been developing in her academy coursework and refining in the practice teaching sessions. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in her characteristic direct hand, she had written, 2 more years. The school will be in better hands than Reeves by then. No offense to Reeves, he showed the letter to Lenora. Lenora read it and made a small sound that was something between amusement and pride and said, "She's going to be insufferable when she's actually doing this full time." In the best possible way. The 2nd year passed and the 3rd year began. Gideon was 63 now. He had the aches of 63 years in his joints in the mornings, which he addressed by getting up earlier so that they had more time to resolve before the day actually required anything of him. He had reading glasses that he still did not like but had made a permanent peace with, because the alternative was squinting at ledgers until his head ached, and the ledgers were not going to get larger. His hair had gone all the way to white, sometime in the past year, not a sudden change. But the kind that you notice one morning has simply completed itself without announcement. See, the ranch was in good order, better order in some respects than it had ever been, because Lenora's management of the household had freed up the particular bandwidth that Gideon had always spent on the daily logistics of the house, and he had redirected it toward the larger operations, which benefited from the attention. The eastern boundary fence, the section that Clara had been worrying about on the ride home from Millhaven, had been properly rebuilt in the spring of the second year and was solid. He thought about that sometimes. The fence, the fact that she had seen it from horseback and noted it, and he had told her Dale would see to it, and Dale had, in fact, seen to it. Small things. The small things were what you were actually made of, he'd come to understand. The large decisions were rare enough to be manageable. The small things were every day. Iron Hollow had changed in ways that weren't visible from the road. The workers' housing had been improved not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily in the way that sustainable change happens when the person making it understands that the point is for it to last. Better insulation, better stoves, proper outbuildings for families with children, so that the children had space that was theirs and not just a corner of a bunkhouse. The medical assistance that Harlow provided to ranch workers had been formalized into something with actual structure. Gideon paid a quarterly fee. Harlow came out once a month on a scheduled visit rather than only in emergencies. And the Hands and their families knew they could send for him without worrying about the cost coming out of their wages. These were not large things in the ledger. They were significant things in the lives of the people they affected. Gideon had come to understand. In the way you understand things, you should have understood a long time ago that the ledger had always been measuring the wrong column. He did not make speeches about any of this. He did not tell anyone he had changed or explain the changes with reference to 3 a.m. kitchens or Civil War battlefields or photographs in old lockets. The changes were practical. They made the ranch function better. He made them, and then he made the next ones, and that was what it looked like from the outside. From the inside it looked different. From the inside it looked like a man who had been given his life back at 23 by a stranger who asked nothing for it, and who had spent 40 years not quite knowing what to do with the gift, and who had finally, at 61, found the answer not in a single large gesture, but in the accumulation of ordinary decisions made in the right direction. It was a Wednesday in early autumn of the third year, 2 weeks after the anniversary of that first night in the kitchen, when Dale came to find Gideon in the north pasture and told him there was a wagon coming through the gate. He didn't need to say more than that. Gideon read his foreman's expression, the particular quality of restrained something that Dale allowed himself only when something was worth it, and handed off the work he was doing to the hand beside him and rode toward the house. He saw the wagon from 50 yards out. He saw her before she saw him. She was climbing down from the wagon with the canvas bag over her shoulder, bigger than the one she'd left with. He noticed, because 3 years accumulates more than 1 year, and she was talking to Dale's wife, who had come out of the house when the wagon arrived, and she was talking with her hands the way people talk when they're happy and not paying attention to their hands. She looked different from the girl who had left. Not unrecognizable, the directness was still there, the particular quality of focused attention, the chin that came up when she was deciding something. But she stood differently, not more relaxed. Exactly. Clara Bellamy was never going to be a relaxed person. That was simply not her nature, but more settled. More fully occupying her own skin. The way people look when they have been doing the thing they were supposed to be doing, and it has agreed with them. She had the teaching certificate in her bag, as he learned later. With highest honors, as the letter from the academy had informed him 6 weeks prior, which he had shown to Lenora and then put in the desk drawer, because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be kept. Lenora came through the front door of the house at a pace that was, for Lenora, rapid. She did not run. Clara Bellamy did not run, but she moved with an urgency that had nothing to do with household management, and Clara turned from talking to Dale's wife and saw her mother coming and went to meet her. And they came together in the yard in the particular way of two people who have lived apart for 3 years and have handled it correctly by writing letters and have missed each other continuously anyway. Gideon stopped his horse 20 yards off and watched. He did not approach immediately. This was not his moment. He understood this. He waited until the initial reunion had settled into something less immediate. Until Clara had her arm around her mother's waist and Lenora had her hand on Clara's shoulder, and they were both slightly embarrassed by the public quality of their own feelings. Which was entirely characteristic of both of them, and then he rode the rest of the way in. Clara looked up and saw him coming. "Mr. Rourke," she said. Clara. He dismounted. He looked at her. He thought about saying something about highest honors, or about the letter, or about the 3 years and what they had held, and he said none of it because none of it was quite right, and the thing that was right was simpler than all of it. Come see the school. She looked at him, and the smile came the real one, the one that changed her face, the one he had last seen on the day she'd left. Right now. Why not? She looked at Lenora. Lenora made a gesture that was both permission and dismissal, the gesture of a woman who knows her daughter well enough to know the school is where she needs to go first, before anything else. Clara went with him. They walked from the main house to the school building, which was a 10-minute walk across the property in the direction of the east pasture, past the fence line that had been rebuilt in the spring of the second year. She noticed the fence. She did not say anything about it, but she looked at it with recognition and a small shift in expression that meant she'd noted it and filed it. She saw the school from 100 yards off. He watched her see it. She slowed her pace without appearing to notice she was doing it. The building was modest. He had not wanted grand. He had wanted solid, a single long room with 4 good windows on the south side for light. A proper chimney, the teacher's quarters attached at the east end with a separate entrance. The yard in front was cleared and level and had 2 benches that the carpenter had added on his own initiative, which Gideon had noticed and not removed. Clara walked up to the building and put one hand flat on the wall, the way you put your hand on something to confirm it's real. How many students, she said. 14 this year. Likely more next year. Word travels, Miguel Perez. 12 now. He finished the standard level in the first year. Gideon paused. He's been reading everything he can find. Your mother has been supplying him. Clara turned to look at him. She has? She considers it an extension of the household accounts. Educational supply. He said it without inflection. She's not wrong. Clara turned back to the building. The classroom. Open. He had unlocked it that morning when Dale told him the wagon had been spotted on the road. She pushed the door open and went in. He stood in the doorway and watched her move through the space. She went to the front of the room to the blackboard wall. Not as a fantasy, which Aldous Reeves had left chalked with a geography lesson he'd been in the middle of when the school year ended in June, and she stood in front of it and turned around and looked at the tables. 6 of them. 24 seats, 14 filled this year. More next year. She looked at the room the way he had looked at his ledger at the beginning of all this, with the focused, precise attention of someone assessing what was there and what it required and what could be made of it. It's good, she said. It's a good room. She walked to the south windows. The afternoon light came in at the angle that the south windows were designed to catch, and the room in that light looked better than its materials. Alone would suggest the way all good simple things look better in the right light. The benches outside were a good idea. That was the carpenter. Tell him I said so. You can tell him yourself. He lives on the property. She looked at him over her shoulder. He's a ranch hand who does carpentry. He is now a ranch hand and the person responsible for the maintenance and repair of the school building, which comes with a small additional wage. Gideon paused. It seemed like the efficient solution. Clara studied him for a moment. You've been busy, she said. There was a plan, he said. See, I worked the plan. She turned back to the window. See, outside the autumn light was doing what it did in Montana. In September, the particular gold that had no equivalent in other seasons, the one that made even the dried grass distances look like something worth looking at. See, I'm going to teach Miguel Perez to think in ways that don't have a ceiling, she said. See, not loudly, not with performance. Just saying a thing she had been thinking for 3 years and had now arrived at the place to say it. See, I'm going to teach all of them that whatever the room holds. See, he believed her. He believed her in the specific way that you believe a person who is not making a promise, but describing a fact about themselves that has already been proven. See, she had been teaching herself mathematics from fence post books while doing another person's night work. See, she had been keeping up from a cold cabin by herself with material that academy students struggled with in heated classrooms with instructors. See, she had stood on a fruit crate with bleeding hands and made bread for 32 men because there was a job that needed doing, and she was the one available to do it. See, she was going to teach those children to think without a ceiling. See, he had no doubt about it at all. See, they stood in the school building for a while without talking, which was their most natural mode and always had been, and the autumn light moved across the floor in the slow way it does in the afternoon when the day has settled into its last hours. See, my grandfather, Clara said finally. She was still looking out the south windows. See, he made one decision in one field on one afternoon. See, and this is where it went. She paused, this room. See, this light. 14 children coming through that door in the morning. She paused again longer. See, that's a strange thing to hold in your head. It is, he agreed. See, do you think he knew that it would? She stopped. See, not this specifically, but that it would go somewhere. See, he thought about this honestly. He thought about the hands that had grabbed him in the smoke and the voice that had said, you don't die here, and you go home and you make something of it. See, and he thought about whether a man who said those things understood the full scope of what he was asking for. See, I think he knew enough, Gideon said. I think he understood that it mattered. See, the specifics, he paused. I don't think anyone can know the specifics. See, you just make the choice, and then the specifics are somebody else's work. See, Clara was quiet. He made the choice, she said. You did the work. See, you did the work, he said. I just stopped getting in the way of it. See, she looked at him. The expression on her face was the open one, the underneath one, and she let it stay there longer. This time didn't call the composure back immediately. Let him see it. See, which was itself a kind of trust that she hadn't offered in the beginning and that he understood the value of. See, we should go back, she said finally. Mama will want to feed me. See, she'll have been planning the meal since she got my letter saying which day I was arriving. See, 3 days ago, he said. She's been planning since 3 days ago. See, has she made the chicken? She has, Clara smiled. See, the real one. Good. She walked to the door of the classroom. See, she paused with her hand on the doorframe and looked back at the room. One more time, the blackboard with the unfinished geography lesson, the tables, the south windows, and their afternoon light. See, the pot-bellied stove in the corner that would matter a great deal come November. See, she looked at it the way you look at a thing that you have been waiting for long enough that the arrival of it requires a moment to register as real. See, then she went out and he followed, and he pulled the door shut behind them. See, they walked back across the property in the late September light, past the rebuilt fence, past the east pasture where 2 of the hands were working the cattle. See, past the bunkhouse where someone had started a fire against the evening chill, and the smoke went up straight in the still air. See, past the small cemetery at the property's edge where Eleanor Rourke had been buried 20 years ago. See, which he had not been able to look at for the first decade, and had come to be able to look at now, not without feeling it, but without the feeling undoing him. See, past all of it, toward the main house where Lenora was making dinner, and the lights were on in the kitchen windows, and the smell of wood smoke and food came out to meet them. See, Clara walked beside him. She was talking about the academy. About a student she'd taught in her placement year who had reminded her of herself at 12. See, about a method she'd learned for teaching fractions to children who had never thought mathematically before and found the whole enterprise foreign and slightly threatening. See, she was talking with her hands again, the way she'd been talking with Dale's wife when the wagon arrived, not performing for an audience, but just talking. See, the way people talk when they are comfortable and have things to say and know the person beside them is actually listening. See, he listened. He was not a man who listened easily, generally. See, he was a man who assessed and processed and responded efficiently, which was not the same thing as listening. See, but he had been learning. See, in the 3 years since a girl had stood on a fruit crate in his kitchen and told him her secret was none of his business, and then told him anyway, he had been learning that listening was a skill and not an instinct, and that it, see, improved with practice, and he had been practicing. See, he listened to her talk about fractions, and the child who reminded her of herself and the placement year and what she was going to do differently now that she had her own room with her name, so to speak, on the door. See, at the front steps of the house, she stopped the same way. She had stopped the evening they'd come back from Mill Haven, and she looked at him at the same eye level, and she said nothing for a moment. See, you're not the same person you were 2 years ago, she said. See, 3. Since that night in the kitchen, he considered whether this was true. See, he thought it probably was in the ways that mattered. See, he was still 63 and still running Iron Hollow and still not sentimental by nature and still incapable of small talk at length and still inclined to walk away from conversations that had stopped going anywhere useful. See, those things had not changed, but the silence of the house did not press on him the same way anymore. See, he did not sit in his study in the evenings with the ledger open as a reason to stay awake. See, he wrote letters to a former student and taught bookkeeping to a housekeeper who had now surpassed him in her instinct for it and went to bed at a reasonable hour and slept. See, he had a sense, tentative, and not something he would say out loud, that he had been living in a house for 30 years without fully inhabiting it. See, he was inhabiting it now. It was strange how much difference it made. See, people change, he said, or they should. She looked at him for a moment. See, grandfather would say you were always this person. See, that you just needed the right circumstances to be him. She paused. See, he believed in that people were mostly who they needed to be, underneath. See, they just needed the right. She paused again, searching for the word, opening. See, Gideon looked at her. He thought about a field in Virginia. See, he thought about smoke and the sound of artillery and 2 hands grabbing him under the arms. See, he thought about the opening that those hands had made, not just the opening of survival, but the opening into everything that survival could become, if you decided to let it. See, he thought about a kitchen at 3 a.m, and a girl on a wooden crate, and a scholarship letter in a satchel, and all the things that had been quietly, invisibly in crisis around him while he reviewed ledgers. See, and about how close it had all come to going the other way to Lenora, in a cold cabin until spring, to Clara's scholarship missed by a week, to Nathaniel Bellamy's line disappearing into a Montana winter without anyone knowing what had been lost. See, he thought about how close the gap had been, how narrow the opening. See, and about how, once you passed through it, the other side was so much larger than the opening suggested it would be. See, he wasn't wrong about much, your grandfather, Gideon said. See, Clara looked at him for one more moment with the open expression, the real one, and then she nodded once the short, decisive nod and went up the front steps and into the house. See, he stood at the bottom of the steps. The evening had come on while they walked back from the school, and the sky over Iron Hollow was the deep autumn blue that preceded dark, the last color of the day before everything went to black and stars. See, the land spread out in every direction the way it always had the pastures, the distant fence lines, the buildings that he had put up one by one over 30 years, the school building invisible from here but there. See, solid, with a blackboard inside waiting to be used. See, the cattle were settled, the hands were at supper in the bunkhouse. See, the smoke from the kitchen chimney went straight up in the still air. See, In the morning, 14 children would walk through the door of that schoolroom, and Clara Bellamy would stand in front of the blackboard, and the chalk would move, and something would begin that was going to go on long after any of. See, them in directions none of them could see from here. See, he knew this the way he knew reliable things, not through optimism, but through the evidence of what he had already watched her do. See, the debt that had been owed for 38 years was not paid. See, he understood this now completely. See, he had thought when he sent Wesley Pike to town with the letters, and when he drove the stage coach with Clara to Millhaven, and when he broke ground on the school building, he had thought he was paying something down. See, settling an account. He understood now that this was the wrong way to look at it entirely, and that looking at it as a debt had been a way of keeping it small enough to manage. See, what Nathaniel Bellamy had given him was not a debt. See, it was an instruction. Make something of it, and the something was not finished. See, the something was Miguel Perez at 12 years old, running toward the main house with books clutched to his chest. See, it was the Henderson children and the families from 3 neighboring properties walking their children to a schoolroom that hadn't existed 2 years ago. See, it was Lenora Bellamy in the study in the evening, reviewing accounts with the concentrated confidence of a woman who had found the full scope of her own capability and was using it. See, it was Clara in front of a blackboard in the morning, in the good south light, teaching children to think without a ceiling. See, the instruction was not about Gideon. It had never been about Gideon. See, he stood at the bottom of the front steps for a while and let the evening come in around him, the way you can let something come in when you are not bracing against it anymore. See, when you have stopped spending the energy of a full life trying to hold the quiet at arm's length. See, the quiet was the same quiet. Iron Hollow was the same land. See, he was the only thing that had changed. He went up the steps and into the house, into the warmth and the smell of dinner and the sound of Clara's voice from the kitchen, already talking to Lenora, talking and probably making Lenora laugh. See, because Clara could make Lenora laugh in a way that not many people could, and the laugh was a good one, low and genuine and worth walking toward. See, he hung his coat on the hook in the hallway. He went to wash his hands for dinner. See, he was not lonely. See, he had not been lonely, he realized, not in the way that sat on a man's chest like a stone, since the night he'd walked into his own kitchen and found a girl on a wooden crate who had come to finish her mother's work before anyone noticed. See, she had thought she was the one with everything at stake. See, she had been right. She just hadn't known that he was also included in that his stakes were bound up in hers in ways that neither of them could have seen from the beginning of the story. See, that was the thing about stories of this kind. You didn't know you were inside them while they were happening. See, you only saw the shape of it afterward, from the other side of the opening, looking back at how small the door had been and how much had come through it. He sat down to dinner. The house was full.